Have you ever seen a quiet chef reveal her hidden past to protect everything she loves? In our gripping story, Elisa Pierce, once an elite Marine sniper, discovers she can't run from her old skills when a ruthless gang threatens her neighborhood. The stakes skyrocket when Elisa squares off against Silas, the gang's cunning leader, in a stormlit showdown that crackles with tension. Imagine heart-pounding chases through rain-soaked streets, desperate last-minute rescues, and the roar of thunder as a single bullet changes everything. If you're hooked on action-packed twists and characters who refuse to back down, you won't want to miss the full story. Tune in to experience every suspenseful moment and find out how Elisa's secret talents might just save her community or destroy her peace forever. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories and help us spread the excitement. Elisa Pierce woke before sunrise as she did every day, her modest Brooklyn apartment still shrouded in dawn's dim light. She sat at the small wooden table in her kitchen, sipping coffee that was more function than flavor. Steam curled above the mug, reflected faintly in the window. Outside, faint pink ribbons streaked the sky, slowly chasing the last remnants of night away. The routine was soothing. This quiet moment was how she reset her thoughts. By the time the city's roar fully awoke, she would already be at the diner prepping for another day. Officially, she was just a chef and owner of Elisa's Kitchen, a humble diner wedged between a dry cleaner and an old bookstore. To anyone passing by, it looked like one more relic of the neighborhood's past, the neon sign flickering in half-broken letters. Inside, the walls displayed vintage Brooklyn photographs, and the menu board bore daily specials in chalk, hearty stews, homemade pies, and other comfort foods. The place had a reputation for warmth and good cooking. Neighbors and traveling cabbies alike would drop in for a quick meal or late-night coffee. Yet there was a certain poise in the way Elisa carried herself, an understated confidence that suggested she'd seen a life beyond measuring cups and spatulas. She walked with measured steps, shoulders straight, eyes calmly aware. Sometimes regulars noted how she'd quietly observe a new face a bit longer than she needed to, just enough to read their stance, the set of their jaw, or the subtle shift of their hand. Small details, but crucial in dangerous places. Because Elisa Pierce had been more than just a cook in a past life. She was an ex-Marine sniper, a near legend among the small circle of those who'd fought alongside her. Recruited for her sharp eyes and unyielding calm, she'd served multiple tours where she made her mark with deadly accuracy. But that part of her life was sealed away the moment she'd stepped onto a plane home, determined to start over somewhere she could sink into the background. Some days she wondered if she truly believed her own cover. Between dawn and dusk, she was wholly immersed in stirring soups and kneading dough, as though the peaceful monotony could wash away memories of desert campaigns, nighttime raids, or the recoil of a sniper rifle pressed to her shoulder. She rarely spoke of it. In fact, aside from a handful of old service buddies she seldom contacted, no one knew. That secrecy was deliberate. Elisa wanted no part of the life that once forced her to live on the razor's edge, holding her breath as she peered through a scope at possible targets. But trouble, as she'd learned, didn't always ask for permission before knocking. Though the streets outside her diner were typically filled with the everyday hustle of working-class families, rumor had it a new set of criminal elements was drifting in. People whispered about a gang demanding protection money from local shops, threatening violence if owners refused to pay up. The chatter was hushed, uneasy, as though the mere mention might draw danger closer. Elisa hadn't yet decided if she'd intervene, or if she even should. The last thing she wanted was to stir old embers of conflict, but it was becoming clear that no corner of New York City was ever truly safe from menacing shadows. The morning she decided to investigate those rumors was colder than usual, a chilly wind threading through the early fall air. Elisa walked to the diner with her canvas grocery bag tucked under one arm. Her free hand rested at her side, fingertips close to the jacket pocket containing her keys. On the surface, she looked like any other Brooklyn local braving the morning cold, but her senses stayed vigilant, scanning the block with casual glances. At 5:01 a.m., she unlocked the diner's front door, flipped on the overhead lights, and let the warm glow flood the small seating area. The tables and chairs were arranged in neat rows, a few vinyl booths hugging the walls, their surfaces reflecting the artificial light. She hurried to the kitchen to check on her pre-prepped dough, then clicked on the radio for some soft background music. This was her daily solace. Quiet solitude, the chance to immerse herself in honest labor before customers arrived with appetites and conversation. The smell of yeast and flour soon enveloped the diner as she set about kneading bread dough for the day's rolls. Soon after, she started the soup stock, chopping onions and carrots with effortless, machine-like precision. The repetitive tasks allowed her mind to roam. She recalled fragments of the night before, murmurs from anxious patrons mentioning a group of men, possibly part of a rising gang, going door to door. Demands for protection fees were whispered, along with vague threats for those who refused to pay. Her neighbors had tensed up, and she could see it in the way they locked their doors and glanced over their shoulders. If such a group came to her diner, how would she respond? Elisa had a rule: violence only when no other option remained. She'd left the Marines partially because she'd grown weary of living in a constant state of alert, uncertain what each day might demand of her. Civilians rarely understood the mental toll of scanning rooftops for snipers or analyzing dusty roads for hidden IEDs. Now that she had carved out a calmer life, she was reluctant to be forced back into that mindset. Yet part of her recognized that there were lines that couldn't be crossed. Threatening her neighbors for money was one of them. Not long after she'd set the soup to simmer, the familiar creak of the door signaled the first customer, an old friend named Mike, who ran the bookstore next door. He stomped the dust off his shoes and gave Elisa a small wave. "Morning," she greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're early. Everything all right?" Mike shifted his weight from foot to foot. "No, not really," he admitted. "Got visited last night by a few toughs. Told me I had a week to pay up, or else they'd make sure I couldn't sell another paperback. Told me they'd break windows. That sort of thing." He looked exhausted, lines of worry etched around his eyes. Elisa frowned, feeling a stir of anger. "How much do they want?" "500 a month." Mike huffed, as though saying it aloud made it even more ludicrous. "That's half my profit margin." Elisa folded her arms. She could easily guess what kind of intimidation tactics might follow. Her diner might be next, or any of the other small businesses. For now, she simply said, "We'll figure something out, Mike. Don't make any rash moves just yet." Mid-morning brought a small rush of regulars, local plumbers, taxi drivers, a police officer from the nearby precinct who always grabbed a cup of black coffee before heading out on patrol. Elisa managed her kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra, ensuring omelets, sandwiches, and pastries all arrived on time. Yet behind her professional calm, her mind churned with possibilities. Her thoughts wandered to a locked drawer in the back storage room where she kept her old Marine memorabilia, a handful of service medals, an official discharge certificate, and a battered lockbox that contained 2 well-maintained firearms. She'd hoped never to need them again. Over the years, she'd told herself it was strictly precautionary. After all, New York could be dangerous, especially at night. But she hadn't touched those weapons in months, content with her new identity as a chef. The knowledge that they were there still gave her a certain reassurance, just in case. Around 10:30 a.m., the clatter of the door announced new arrivals. A trio of men walked in, their heavy boots thudding on the tile floor. They wore leather jackets with small insignias on the chest, a stylized snake coiled around a baseball bat. All conversation in the diner seemed to drop an octave. Patrons eyed them warily, an undercurrent of tension creeping into the air. Elisa felt it in the pit of her stomach, a subtle shift, as though the normal hum of daily life had been disrupted by a wrong note. She emerged from the kitchen, carefully setting aside the cloth she'd been using to wipe down counters. Approaching the men, she kept her posture relaxed but her gaze steady. "Morning," she said simply, forcing the hint of a polite smile. The tallest of the three leaned on the counter. "We're looking for the owner," he announced, voice dripping with a confidence that suggested he never heard the word no. "Need to have a talk about a new arrangement in the neighborhood." Nearby, a hush fell over the customers. They sipped their coffee, uncertain whether they should step in or keep their heads down. Elisa remained composed. "I'm Elisa Pierce, owner and chef," she replied. "What can I help you with?" The man flashed a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "That's good. We're offering protection. 500 a month. We make sure your windows stay intact. No trouble from anyone. Call it a safety net." Elisa nodded slowly, pretending to consider the offer. Inside, her thoughts whirled. She glanced around, noticing how some of her regulars, including Mike, looked unsettled. "Appreciate the concern," she said evenly, "but I've been doing just fine so far. I don't think I need protection from anything." The second man, stockier, with a noticeable scar running across his cheek, crossed his arms. "That's what they all say at first," he muttered. "Trouble is, accidents can happen. Be a shame if someone as hardworking as you got caught in a random act of vandalism." Elisa felt a spark of anger. She kept her voice level. "I'll keep that in mind." The tall one smirked at her dismissive tone. "We'll be back in a week," he declared, turning on his heel. "Hope you'll be more open-minded by then." His two companions followed, sneering at a table of wide-eyed customers on their way out. Once they were gone, a collective exhale swept the diner. Elisa stared at the door, fists clenched. The threat was no longer abstract. It was right there in her face, demanding money and menacing the neighborhood she'd grown to love. The question that pressed in on her now was how far she was willing to go to protect it, and whether she could do so without unearthing the part of herself she'd tried to bury. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind tall brick buildings, Elisa busied herself closing up the diner. She wiped down tables, flipped chairs onto tabletops, and gathered leftover pastries to donate to a nearby shelter. Outside, the city lights flickered on in stages, neon signs and street lamps creating pockets of luminescence along the sidewalks. Brooklyn's characteristic bustle was still present. Families returning from work, teenagers skateboarding down the block, distant taxi horns echoing. In this half-lit realm, she felt a pang of nostalgia for the desert nights during her tours. The Marine base would sometimes sit in stillness under an endless sky of stars, yet beneath that calm surface lay a perpetual readiness for danger. Night vision goggles, guard rotations, the weight of loaded weapons at her side, all so different from wiping counters in a small diner. But the memory triggered an involuntary spike in her adrenaline. As she locked the front door, she couldn't shake the feeling that a new battlefront was forming here. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She fished it out to see a text from an old comrade, Jonas, who'd served in the same sniper unit. Once in a while, Jonas checked in to see how she was coping with civilian life. The message was simple. "Hey, hope you're doing well. Miss your sharpshooting. Let's catch up sometime." She stared at it for a moment, torn between the comfort of hearing from an old friend and the anxiety of being pulled back into old connections. Elisa typed a quick reply, something polite but non-committal, before slipping the phone away. She began her short walk home. The diner was only 6 blocks from her apartment, a distance she chose specifically so she could feel the pavement under her feet, observe the neighborhood's nightly rhythms, and keep a sense of awareness that driving never afforded. She passed a shuttered barber shop and noticed the glass pane had been spray painted with graffiti. That hadn't been there the day before. Her brow furrowed. The symbols looked like the same stylized snake from the thugs' jackets. She made a mental note. The group was marking territory, expanding their intimidation tactics. At the corner, an elderly man with a cane stood under a flickering streetlight, eyes darting nervously. Elisa paused. "Everything all right, Mr. Rosario?" she asked softly. He was a retiree who lived in a cramped apartment above the bakery. He'd once told her stories of old Brooklyn, back when neighbors left their doors unlocked. "Not sure," Mr. Rosario replied, voice trembling a bit. "Some rowdy guys have been loitering around, giving folks trouble." He lowered his voice as though he feared being overheard. "They asked me if I know which businesses haven't paid up. Told me I didn't know anything, but I think they're watching everyone." Elisa felt the weight of his fear like a physical presence. She gently placed a hand on his arm. "Head home safe," she said, glancing around. "Try to stay out of their way. If anything serious happens, call the cops immediately." He nodded, though doubt lingered on his face. The police might not be enough if these criminals were organized or had bigger backers. Elisa continued on her route, her thoughts swirling. These thugs were systematically terrorizing the area. It was one thing to stand up to them on her own, but if they retaliated against innocents, like Mr. Rosario or Mike, could she stand by and watch? She paused under a street lamp, looking up at the sky. In the distance, clouds drifted across a pale moon. "One step at a time," she muttered, moving forward. But the old habits of reconnaissance had already taken hold in her mind. She'd begun mapping vantage points, dark alleys, and potential escape routes. Barely conscious, she was doing it. The cornered chef was awakening the ex-Marine sniper within. The following morning, the tension in the neighborhood became more palpable. Word spread that a local grocery store owner had received a threatening note pinned to his door, $500 a month or face consequences. Another shop had a brick thrown through its window overnight. The police took statements, but they seemed uncertain or overwhelmed. The neighborhood wasn't exactly high on the priority list for immediate crackdowns unless something far more violent occurred. In the face of this creeping intimidation, Elisa tried to maintain the usual routine. She arrived at the diner earlier than normal, wanting extra time to set up and gather her thoughts. The comfort of routine work soothed her. She kneaded dough for bread, carefully measured spices for the day's soup, and arranged produce in neat rows. The clatter of pans and the hum of the kitchen fan were reassuring reminders that at least here, in her diner, she had control. Her mind kept drifting back to conversations with fellow Marines in faraway desert camps, where they talked about future plans. Some wanted to open mechanic shops, others dreamed of real estate ventures or traveling the world. Elisa had confessed she wanted something simple, a quiet place where she could cook. Everyone joked that Sniper Chef would make an epic reality show, but deep down, it was never a joke to her. She really had wanted nothing more than to be left in peace. As the day's first customers trickled in, she plastered on a friendly smile and served eggs and toast with her typical efficiency. Eventually, Mike from the bookstore and a few other local business owners shuffled in, forming a small huddle near the corner booth. Their subdued chatter drew Elisa's attention. During a brief lull in the breakfast rush, she joined them, coffee pot in hand. "What's the word?" she asked quietly, topping off their cups. Mike cleared his throat. "Word is some of us are going to pay. They say it's less risky than refusing. Others are hoping the cops or the city will step in. Meanwhile," he trailed off, looking around the diner. "I'm guessing you got a visit too?" Elisa nodded grimly. They dropped by. Same story, different script. Next to Mike sat a tired-looking woman named Ida, who ran the bakery a few doors down. She rubbed her temples. "I don't want to pay these thugs, but my husband is worried. He thinks it's safer to hand over the money than risk them targeting our kids or employees." Another man, short and stocky, piped up. "We need a plan. We can't let them just waltz in and take over. But at the same time, a few shattered windows or damaged property could ruin us." Elisa placed the coffee pot on the table, choosing her words carefully. "If you want to go to the police, do it together. Make a united front. That way they know we're serious, and it's not just one business complaining." She paused. "But if that doesn't work, well, we look out for each other." Mike shot her a curious glance. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, feigning casualness. "Neighbors can keep an eye on each other's places. Communication goes a long way." She didn't want to reveal any hidden capabilities just yet, though part of her knew that if push came to shove, mere vigilance might not be enough. Anxiety pressed down on the group. Paying the gang would only invite more demands, but defiance could lead to retaliations. As Elisa walked back to the kitchen, she realized she was balancing on a razor's edge. If the community couldn't find a solution, the criminals would keep tightening their grip, and she, who'd longed for a quiet life, might be forced to channel the sniper she once was. 2 days later, right as the afternoon lull set in at the diner, Elisa found herself surprising even her own expectations. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, wiping her hands on a dish towel, eyes narrowed as she surveyed her surroundings. The bright sun cast sharp shadows along the street, and in those darker pockets, she imagined threats lurking. It was just after 2 Romano p.m., neither rush hour nor prime lunchtime. A perfect moment for a reconnaissance walk, she thought, swiftly discarding the notion that she was overreacting. She strolled down the block, heartbeats echoing with an old familiarity. This was no ordinary walk. Her eyes took in building layouts, alley entrances, the angles of rooftops. She made mental notes of where security cameras were positioned and which corners might conceal trouble. It all came back to her in a rush, as effortlessly as breathing. Once a Marine sniper, always a Marine sniper. At the grocery store on the next block, she saw the shattered remnants of a display window. The owner, a portly man named Brian, was sweeping up glass. Elisa bent down to help, offering a brief sympathetic smile. "Thanks, Hearn," Brian muttered, his voice tinged with both relief and resignation. "I guess they're sending a message, huh?" Elisa nodded, not pressing for details. She already suspected the culprits. It was the same group systematically marking territory. She moved on after a few moments, continuing her impromptu patrol. Finally, she reached the corner store at the far end of the street, where she spotted fresh graffiti, the coiled snake again, painted in bold red strokes. She lingered, glancing around to see if any of the thugs might be nearby. A young mother pushing a stroller eyed the graffiti nervously, crossing the street to avoid walking past it. A teenager with a hoodie and headphones snapped a picture of it with his phone, possibly for social media. Life went on in that strange, tense normality, the neighborhood forging ahead even under a growing cloud of fear. Part of Elisa wanted to keep walking, to search for any sign of the men who'd threatened her and others. But she also knew she couldn't be everywhere at once. Instead, she memorized the new territory markings and strolled back to her diner, a plan forming in her mind. If these criminals continued their campaign, she might need more than her own pair of eyes. The locals needed some sort of network, calls, messages, or a quick way to raise the alarm whenever trouble appeared. Standing outside Elisa's kitchen, she caught a glimpse of herself reflected in the glass window. Gone was the strictly civilian posture she'd cultivated. Her expression had hardened, her shoulders squared in readiness, reminding her of the person she'd been on deployment. "I thought I left all that behind," she whispered under her breath. But there was a difference. Before, she'd been operating under orders, fighting battles chosen for her. Now, if she fought at all, it would be her own choice, defending a neighborhood she'd come to cherish. However, in the distance, she noticed two men clad in black leaning against a lamppost. They weren't from around here. Their gaze flicked her way and lingered. Elisa felt a chill scrape down her spine. She returned their stare, unblinking. Eventually, they moved off. She took a steadying breath. The lines were being drawn, almost like an invisible perimeter around her block. And she was once again caught in the crosshairs of potential conflict, with a sense that bigger battles might lie ahead. That same evening, Elisa closed the diner earlier than usual. She offered apologies to any late customers, citing a need to handle some pressing errands. In truth, she had an appointment she never could have predicted a month ago. A discreet meeting with a few local shopkeepers, plus a friendly officer from the precinct. They gathered in the back room of the bookstore, the space crowded with boxes of paperbacks and the smell of aging pages. In attendance were Mike, the bookstore owner, Ida from the bakery, Brian from the grocery, and Officer Meredith Jackson, a beat cop who had patrolled this neighborhood for years. A few others filtered in as well. A barber, a tailor, the diner's produce supplier. All wore tense expressions. With the shutters closed, the overhead fluorescent buzzed like a flickering secret lamp in an interrogation room. Elisa quietly took a seat in a corner, arms crossed. She was used to planning sessions in secure rooms, a commanding officer laying out strategies around a fold-out map. This was the civilian version, a mismatched group of local proprietors trying to figure out how to keep their livelihood safe. Officer Jackson cleared her throat. "I understand from several of you that there's been a recent spate of threats and vandalism. Some have mentioned a group that calls themselves the Vipers." She glanced at her notes. "Is that correct?" Mike nodded. "They're demanding $500 a month from each shop, or else. Broken windows, spray paint, intimidation. We're all worried." The officer's face hardened. "We're aware of them. They operate in a few other neighborhoods. Organized intimidation for protection fees. We're trying to gather evidence, but it's tricky. We need complaints filed, solid proof, or a direct witness. Otherwise, it's hard to get warrants." Ida spoke up, voice trembling slightly. "What about a sting operation or increased patrols?" Jackson sighed. "The precinct is stretched thin. We do what we can, but resources are limited. Mayor's got us focusing on larger crime rings. The Vipers, they might not be big enough to register on that radar until something truly violent happens." Elisa watched the frustration settle over the small crowd. She felt a pang of sympathy, recalling how bureaucracy often moves slower than the criminals. Clearing her throat, she said, "Maybe we can work together, a phone tree or text chain, so if we see them coming, we can alert the rest. Keep notes on who, where, and when. Evidence might help the police take stronger action. Jackson nodded. That's a start. If any of you can record their demands or at least get license plate numbers, descriptions, times, whatever you can gather without putting yourselves in danger, it can bolster a case. Brian frowned. And in the meantime, they're not going to stop just because we're collecting intel. They might escalate. Elisa understood that fear all too well. If the Vipers felt the neighborhood was resisting, they might up the ante. She closed her eyes briefly, memories flickering. Distant gunfire, an insurgent group responding to pushback with greater force. Taking a measured breath, she opened them again. Then we do our best to stay safe, she said. Lock up earlier. Travel in pairs. Keep cameras rolling if you have them. Strengthen numbers. The group murmured in agreement, though worry still clung to their faces. Officer Jackson promised to do her best, encouraging them to file official complaints. One by one, they trickled out of the bookstore, exchanging hushed goodbyes. But as Elisa slipped into the night, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that all these precautions might only delay a bigger confrontation. The Vipers seemed determined, and she, though determined as well, was only one person, albeit one with skills she had yet to fully reveal. Elisa was exhausted by the time she returned to her apartment. The small one-bedroom unit held a modestly furnished living space, a worn-out couch, a coffee table stacked with cookbooks, and a tiny television she rarely watched. She set down her keys and headed straight to the bathroom, splashing her face with cold water. When she looked in the mirror, the reflection startled her. There was a hardness in her gaze she hadn't seen since her final deployment. She toweled off and wandered into the living room. On the narrow shelf near the door sat a single photo frame. She picked it up and studied the image. Her younger self in desert fatigues, standing beside her spotter, Jonas. Both were grinning, rifles slung over their shoulders, desert sun beating down on their helmets. It felt like a lifetime ago. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb, remembering how proud she'd been to serve, how that sense of purpose had slowly eroded under the strain of constant vigilance. Sighing, she gently set the photo back and dropped onto the couch. The street noises drifted up through her window. Distant sirens, the muffled thump of car stereos, a dog barking. Somewhere among those random sounds lurked the threat of the Vipers, a subtle menace weaving itself into the daily life of her neighborhood. Her phone buzzed. She reached for it, expecting a message from one of her worried neighbors or possibly Officer Jackson. Instead, she saw Jonas's name on the screen. A text flashed. I'm in NYC for a couple of days. Want to grab coffee? Elisa stared, torn between her reluctance to reopen old chapters and her growing sense that she might need backup if the situation escalated. Jonas was one of the few people who truly understood her. They'd spent countless nights on Overwatch duty, scanning the horizon for threats through the scopes of their rifles. He'd have her back in a heartbeat. She typed a quick reply. Sure, let's meet tomorrow, around noon. My diner, address is... After hitting send, she set the phone aside, trying to quell the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. It could be good to see him, she reasoned. Catch up in a calm environment, no bullets whizzing overhead, no dust storms or scorching sun. Yet deep down, she suspected there was another reason she was inviting him. If things got worse, Jonas was the type of ally she'd want by her side. The night passed fitfully. She dreamed of her old station, hearing distant mortar fire. In the dream, she was pinned down behind a broken wall, scanning for an enemy sniper. When she squeezed the trigger, the bullet seemed to travel endlessly in slow motion, never reaching its target. She awoke with a gasp, cold sweat slicking her forehead. For a few heartbeats, she stared at the ceiling, reorienting herself to the safety of her apartment. She wasn't in a war zone anymore, at least not officially. But as she dressed for the day, pulling on her chef's uniform, she wondered whether that was really true. The Vipers were marking territory, extorting her friends, leaving threatening symbols everywhere. The line between war zones and civilian streets wasn't as thick as she'd once believed. All it took was a group of determined criminals to turn a quiet block into a battlefield. And if that happened, the part of her she'd long tried to bury might be all that stood between her diner's community and chaos. Noon arrived, and with it Jonas. Elisa spotted him through the diner's front window before he even stepped inside. He looked much the same. Tall, broad shoulders, a determined set to his jaw. He wore jeans and a simple jacket, but she could still detect the soldier's posture in the way he walked. A wave of mixed emotions washed over her: relief, apprehension, and a subtle warmth at seeing a familiar face she trusted. When Jonas entered, conversation in the diner dipped momentarily as curious patrons noted the newcomer. Elisa walked around the counter to greet him. "Long time no see," she said, offering a small smile. Jonas laughed softly. "You look good. Civilian life suits you." She gestured toward a table by the window. "Grab a seat. I'll fix us something to eat." While she ducked into the kitchen, Jonas studied the place. Warm lighting, neat rows of chairs, a chalkboard menu listing daily specials. He could see why Elisa had chosen this path, a stark contrast to the deserts and danger they once endured. But he also sensed her tension, noticed the subtle flick of her gaze as if scanning for threats. Elisa returned with 2 bowls of steaming clam chowder. They settled into a comfortable silence, taking the first few sips. Eventually, Jonas broke the stillness. "So," he said quietly, leaning forward, "you mentioned trouble in your text." She hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. The diner wasn't too busy at this hour, just a couple in the far corner and an older woman sipping coffee at the counter. "Yeah," Elisa murmured, recounting the Viper's demands, the intimidation tactics, and how the neighborhood was on edge. Jonas listened intently, lips pressed in a thin line. When she finished, he set his spoon down. "Sounds like organized racketeering. Used to see that overseas in smaller villages. Local gangs flexing power. They'd muscle shopkeepers for protection fees." Elisa nodded. "I don't want to escalate things, but they vandalized shops, threatened people. It feels like a slow strangulation. Sooner or later, they'll try to push me too." Jonas rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "You got to be careful, Lisa. One misstep could set them off. Not saying you should pay, but picking a fight might put a target on your back." "I know," she agreed, feeling that tight knot of conflict inside her. Part of her wanted to stand her ground, refuse the criminal's demands, and protect her neighbors. Another part remembered the violence that inevitably comes when lines are drawn. They continued talking in hushed tones, weaving in old memories of their Marine days. Jonas asked if she still kept up with firearms training. She admitted she had a locked stash in the back but rarely touched it. He gave her a level look. "Might be time to dust off those skills," he said. "At least if you want to be prepared." Elisa sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." They finished the chowder and parted ways with an unspoken understanding. Jonas insisted on staying in town for a few more days. He booked a room in a nearby motel, claiming he wanted to see the city's tourist spots. Elisa knew better. Jonas was placing himself close by, just in case. And though a part of her bristled at the possibility of returning to old methods, another part was grateful not to face this growing menace alone. As the afternoon wore on, Elisa returned to her routine, flipping burgers and whipping up milkshakes for a small burst of customers seeking late lunches or early dinners. Jonas quietly observed from a corner seat, finishing up the last of his meal. She could feel his watchful presence, a reassuring reminder that, whatever happened, she wasn't fighting this alone. But trouble never seems to wait for an invitation. Around 4 p.m., just as the diner was settling into a lull, the door swung open with a jarring clang. In walked 3 men wearing those familiar leather jackets adorned with the snake insignia. The same trio that had confronted her before. Their expressions were cocky, and they exuded a tension that made the other diners go silent, forks hovering in midair. Elisa wiped her hands on a dish towel and stepped forward, heart pounding but outwardly calm. Jonas watched from his seat, muscles visibly tensing. The lead thug rapped his knuckles on the counter. "Afternoon, Ms. Pierce," he said, tone dripping with faux politeness. "We're here to discuss your payment schedule." She folded her arms. "I thought we had a week." The man smirked. "It's been almost a week. Figured we'd come by, see if you changed your mind." He glanced around, eyeing the other customers, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. "Don't want anything unfortunate happening, do we?" Elisa's jaw clenched. Every instinct told her to stand firm, but she also noticed Jonas shifting slightly, ready to intervene. "Look," she said, voice steady, "I'm still not interested in paying for protection. I run an honest business here." Behind her, Jonas rose slowly. The second thug, the one with a scar on his cheek, noticed and scowled. "Who's your friend?" he sneered. "Just a customer," Elisa replied without turning around. She could feel the tension mounting, like an electric charge sizzling through the air. The third thug, shorter with a wiry build, tapped his foot impatiently. "You're making a mistake," the lead thug hissed. "I'd hate for your windows to get broken, or your pots and pans to catch fire." Elisa narrowed her eyes. That was a specific threat, and the mention of fire made her blood run cold. Before she could speak, Jonas took a step forward, placing himself close enough to be noticed. "I think you gentlemen should leave," he said calmly, voice low and measured. Scar-cheek Thug's eyes flared with annoyance. "We're conducting business here." Jonas's gaze was steely. "Business hours are over for your kind of nonsense." It was a deliberate provocation, but Jonas's posture was calculated, solid and ready. Elisa saw how the Vipers sized him up, noting the tension in his broad shoulders, the calm intensity in his eyes. Some part of them recognized a threat they hadn't accounted for. An unnerving silence settled. For a moment no one moved, as though the diner's air had turned to glass, fragile and ready to shatter. The lead thug flicked his gaze between Jonas and Elisa, weighing the odds. Finally he shrugged, turning it into a mock pleasant gesture. "We'll be back," he said, voice laced with menace. "And when we return, we expect you to be a little more cooperative." With that, the three men turned and headed out, letting the door slam behind them. An audible exhale passed through the diner as patrons realized the confrontation was over, at least for now. Jonas glanced at Elisa, his expression grave. "They're escalating," he said quietly, confirming what she already knew. The Vipers weren't just going to pester her with polite threats anymore. They were setting the stage for a bigger confrontation, and they would be back. After the Vipers left, the weight of the encounter pressed down on everyone in the diner. The couple in the corner quickly paid their bill and left, clearly rattled. The older woman at the counter finished her coffee in silence, then slipped out with a worried glance at Elisa. Jonas stayed behind, helping Elisa clean up in a show of moral support. She wiped down the counter, gripping the cloth a little too tight. Her mind raced. If the Vipers came back in force, how would she protect her business and the people around her without resorting to violence? She glanced at Jonas, who stood near the door, arms crossed over his chest. There was a readiness in his stance she recognized from missions overseas. "They won't let this go," Jonas said quietly, echoing her thoughts. Elisa nodded. "Yeah, I know. They're testing me, testing the neighborhood. If we don't cave, they'll push harder. If we do pay, they'll just keep milking us." She sighed, setting the cloth aside. "No good options." Jonas shifted his gaze to the street outside, scanning for any sign of them returning. "Maybe it's time to talk to your neighbors again. Strength in numbers, right?" he suggested. She recalled the conversation in the bookstore. The group had tried to unify, but fear made it difficult to stay on the same page. "I'll call another meeting, but I'm not sure it'll help. Officer Jackson can only do so much without evidence." Jonas was silent for a moment. "Look, Lisa, if you need an extra set of eyes or if you decide to stand up to them more directly, I'm here. We've been through worse." Part of her resisted that idea. Dragging Jonas into a conflict on civilian soil felt wrong, but another part recognized the practicality. "I appreciate it," she murmured. I want to avoid casualties. I don't want a war zone in my diner." Jonas pressed his lips together. "Understood. But sometimes these creeps only respond to a show of force." Elisa didn't reply. She thought about the locked drawer in the back, the firearms she'd meticulously cleaned and stored away. She'd always told herself it was just for last resort home defense. Now the thought of using them to protect the diner loomed, a possibility she didn't want, but might be forced to consider. That evening, she left Jonas to watch the place while she visited a few neighboring shops. Mike's bookstore, Ida's bakery, Brian's grocery. The tension in their voices echoed her own worries. Some were considering paying the Vipers just to keep the peace. Others were ready to fight back, though they weren't sure how. Officer Jackson's advice was to document everything, but the Vipers rarely left evidence or witnesses who dared speak up. By the time she returned to Elisa's kitchen, the sun had set and Jonas had locked up. They parted ways on the sidewalk, each lost in thought. Elisa felt the chill of the autumn air settling in. She tugged her jacket tighter, wondering how quickly the situation would escalate and how many more lines would be crossed before the Vipers finally pushed her to break out the sniper inside. The week passed in a haze of mounting tension. The Vipers continued marking the neighborhood with fresh graffiti, sometimes smashing windows or leaving cryptic threats. True to his word, Jonas stuck around, discreetly patrolling the area or observing from a parked car, always near enough to help, but far enough to avoid drawing attention. Some residents were relieved to see a watchful figure, but most were too scared to openly acknowledge what was happening. Inside the diner, customers showed their support in small ways, tipping a little extra, offering encouraging words. Yet the fear was palpable. Fewer patrons came in during the late hours, preferring not to risk an after-dark visit. Sales dipped. Elisa found herself doing more cleaning than cooking some days, but she refused to give in. She opened and closed the diner faithfully, her chin held high. Finally, on a gray Friday afternoon, the situation reached a new breaking point. Elisa noticed unfamiliar cars cruising the block, their occupants scanning the storefronts. She recognized some of the men as Vipers by their snake tattoos or glances of recognition. They never came inside but lingered just long enough to unsettle anyone who saw them. That evening, as dusk cloaked the streets, Elisa decided she couldn't ignore the tension any longer. She invited Jonas and a few brave neighbors, Mike, Ida, Brian, and a local mechanic named Raul, to the diner after closing. They gathered around a table in the dimly lit space, cups of coffee in front of them, fear etched on their faces. Jonas was the first to speak. "I've been watching them. They've got a pattern, making rounds every few days, checking which businesses are paying and which aren't. They send more guys when they suspect resistance. They're probably going to move against you soon, Elisa." Mike swallowed nervously. "That's what I've been afraid of. They haven't approached me again, but I saw them pass by the bookstore at least 3 times this week." Ida chimed in. "I'm still on the fence about paying. My husband thinks it's safer if we just give them what they want." Raul, arms folded, shook his head. "No way. If we pay them, they'll bleed us dry. And who's to say they won't up the fees next month?" Elisa's gaze flicked from face to face. She felt their desperation. Their desire for a solution that wouldn't invite violence yet would free them from the Viper's grip. "I called Officer Jackson," she began. "She says they're trying to build a case, but it could take weeks or months. In the meantime, the best we can do is gather evidence. Watch out for each other, but there's no guarantee that'll stop them from doing worse." A heavy silence descended. Then Jonas spoke, voice resolute. "Look, if you want to avoid a direct clash, the best thing is to make it known that you're not easy targets. Criminals usually pick on those they think won't fight back." He paused, glancing at Elisa. "A few cameras, a show of solidarity. Maybe that'll buy some time." Elisa nodded, recalling her training. Deterrence was sometimes enough if the threat of retaliation was clear. But her heart pounded with the fear that these criminals might call her bluff. If that happened, would she actually be forced to reveal the weapon she was so adept at wielding? Lethal force? Mike ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I'm in," he said quietly. "We at least try to stand together. I'd rather fight than keep living like this." Ida and Brian exchanged uneasy looks but eventually nodded. Raul's jaw tightened in determination. Jonas gave Elisa a questioning glance as if to say, "Are you ready for what might come next?" She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her past pressing against her. "We stand together," she said finally, voice trembling just enough to betray her anxiety. "I just hope we won't be forced to cross that final line." The words hung in the air, a tenuous vow binding them all. Outside, the city lights flickered, and the hum of traffic wove through the silence of the closed diner. Elisa's quiet corner of Brooklyn was perched on the edge of a storm, and whether she liked it or not, she was becoming the focal point of resistance. The ex-Marine sniper would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect her home, and how many old ghosts she would awaken in the process. A raw autumn wind swept through Brooklyn, scattering dry leaves along the sidewalks and rattling the neon sign outside Elisa's kitchen. Inside, Elisa stood with her back against the door, eyes shut, mentally replaying the tense meeting from the previous night. She could still see the worry etched into everyone's faces. Mike twisting his hands, Ida trembling over her coffee, Officer Jackson looking strained. The Vipers were tightening their grip, and the community's vow to stand together felt both empowering and ominous. Jonas had left right before midnight, promising to swing by in the morning. His presence brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Elisa was grateful for his support, but she also knew the path they were headed down. Once you start resisting organized criminals, you can't turn back. The fear swirling in the neighborhood was like kindling for a blaze that could erupt at any moment. Determined to keep life as normal as possible, she opened the diner at dawn, flicking on the overhead lights that bathed the seating area in a warm glow. The day began quietly. A couple of regulars stopping in for scrambled eggs, a few to-go coffees for construction workers on their way to a job site. Elisa tried to project calm, hoping her steady composure might soothe the nervous energy that had infected the block. By mid-morning, Jonas arrived, giving her a quick nod of greeting before settling into his usual corner seat. He ordered a black coffee and a simple breakfast. Anyone looking at him would see just another patron in worn jeans and a jacket, hunched over his steaming mug. But Elisa knew better. His alert eyes scanned the window, the door, and anyone entering or leaving. An old spotter never fully relaxed. They exchanged few words as Elisa worked the counter, but the unspoken communication between them was enough. If the Vipers showed up, Jonas was ready. For a time, she almost believed they might get through the day without incident. Just before noon, however, the tension in the air deepened. Standing at the grill, Elisa sensed it, an almost imperceptible shift. The usual din of conversation dimmed. She glanced up to find a newcomer standing just inside the doorway. He was alone, tall and wiry, wearing the unmistakable coiled snake patch on his leather jacket. His gaze roamed over the small crowd of diners before landing squarely on her. Unlike the previous visits, he didn't immediately issue threats. Instead, he slowly approached the counter. The hush among the patrons was palpable. Forks clinked nervously against plates. Jonas observed from his booth, his posture taut. The man placed a single piece of paper on the counter and slid it toward Elisa. "We hear you're organizing folks around here," he said in a flat tone. "That's not how this neighborhood's supposed to work." Elisa let her gaze fall to the paper. It was a crude photocopied warning notice, a demand for payment, and a list of potential consequences for refusal. She recognized some of the bullet points: vandalism, threats, even references to harming family members. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "You're trespassing," she said simply. He cracked a humorless grin. "We're just giving you one more chance to play nice, but your time is almost up, Chef." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out. The door slammed behind him, leaving a chill in his wake. Elisa exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the threatened escalation. The Vipers were done asking politely, or as politely as criminals ever do. Now they were delivering ultimatums. An hour later, the diner was nearly empty. Jonas lingered, finishing a slice of pie in silence. Elisa carefully locked the front door behind the last customer, flipping the sign to close for an early break. She joined Jonas at the table, smoothing the photocopied thread on the tabletop. The words printed there were so stark, so blunt, that she almost wished for the more direct brand of intimidation the Vipers used before. At least a sneering thug was honest in his hostility. This typed-up intimidation had an unsettling, impersonal finality. Jonas studied the paper. "They're listing all the ways they can make life miserable," he muttered, tapping a bullet point that promised damage to property. "Classic tactics for extortion." Elisa nodded. "They want the rest of the community to see this and break. If enough people pay, their power solidifies." Leaning back, Jonas folded his arms. "And if you don't pay?" She shrugged, tension pulling at her shoulders. "Then the vandalism escalates. Windows smashed, cars keyed, maybe worse. They mentioned family, and that's what worries me the most for everyone else. A lot of folks here have kids." Jonas's mouth tightened. "We need more than just moral support from the neighbors, and we need a plan." He rubbed his jaw in thought. "We could try setting up cameras, maybe catch them in the act. But even if we get footage, would that be enough for the cops to move in?" Elisa sighed. "Hard to say. Officer Jackson is on our side, but without solid evidence of an actual crime beyond graffiti, it might not stick." She traced the edge of the threat notice with a fingertip. "Then there's the question of how long we can keep watch. Day and night, That's a lot of manpower, especially when people have jobs and families. Jonas nodded, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. We might need to rely on another approach. Something that signals to them that messing with your diner or this block isn't worth the trouble. She caught his meaning. Jonas was hinting at a show of force, a reminder that not every target is easy prey. But crossing that line could plunge them into a cycle of retaliation. A beep from her phone startled them both. She picked it up, an incoming text from Mike at the bookstore. They came by, smashed a shelf, threatened to burn the place. My wife's terrified. Elisa stifled a groan. It's starting, she whispered, dread creeping down her spine. The Vipers were making good on their threats already, one store at a time. Jonas stood, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. We should go check on him. We'll figure out the rest after. They left the diner, leaving the closed sign in place. Outside, the sky loomed gray, heavy with the promise of rain. They made their way to the bookstore a few blocks away, weaving through foot traffic and the occasional swirl of windblown trash. Even in broad daylight, Elisa felt the prickle of watchful eyes, shadowy figures lurking in doorways or across the street. She couldn't confirm if they were Vipers or merely strangers, but the paranoia weighed on her. Gone was the comforting anonymity she once cherished. They found Mike hunched over broken wood and scattered paperbacks, pieces of a destroyed shelf littering the floor. It happened so fast, he said, voice shaky. Two guys in leather jackets. They knocked stuff over, told me I had 48 hours to pay up or my bookstore would be ash. Elisa exchanged a worried glance with Jonas. This was more than just talk now. The Vipers were systematically targeting them, turning up the pressure in a calculated campaign. Unless something changed, and soon, the entire neighborhood would either fold or burn. A light rain began to fall as Elisa and Jonas helped Mike clean the shattered remains of his bookshelf. Paperbacks were scattered everywhere, some torn or soaked by puddles that had crept under the door. Mike's wife sat behind the counter, wiping tears from her eyes while trying to console a startled teenager who worked part-time at the store. Elisa recognized the mounting terror in their faces, a feeling she remembered vividly from times she was pinned down under enemy fire. In those moments, fear could paralyze or galvanize. She knelt beside Mike, carefully lifting broken wooden planks. We'll figure this out, she murmured, wishing she had more reassurance to offer. He managed a half-hearted smile. I'm not sure how, he admitted. They said they'll come back. If I don't have the money, they'll torch the place. Maybe even worse. Jonas straightened, scanning the shop's interior as though checking for vantage points. Do you have insurance that might cover arson or vandalism? He asked. Mike shrugged, exhaustion in his eyes. I have basic coverage, but I can't afford a massive rebuild, especially if the store's shut down for months. Silence settled among them. Outside, the rain pattered against the windows, amplifying the sense of impending gloom. Finally, Elisa stood and looked around, noticing the door to a small storage room in the back. Let's see if there's any way to secure this place better, she said softly. Mike led her and Jonas into a cramped space filled with boxes of surplus books, extra shelving, and an outdated security monitor that seemed more decorative than functional. We tried installing cameras a while back, Mike explained, flicking on a dusty monitor. The flicker of black and white images revealed a narrow view of the front store aisle and part of the sidewalk outside. The resolution is terrible, and half the time it doesn't record properly. Funds are tight. Jonas approached the setup, fiddling with the cables. If we could upgrade these cameras, maybe we'd catch the Vipers in the act, he offered. It could help the police. At least it's something. Elisa's gaze shifted from the monitor to Jonas. She understood he was grasping for any strategy that didn't immediately lead to a direct confrontation. She, too, preferred a solution involving law enforcement rather than vigilante tactics. Yet deep down, a nagging voice reminded her that criminals skilled in intimidation often avoided leaving incriminating evidence. They spent the next half hour tidying up the store and taking inventory of the damage. A sense of solidarity flickered among them. Mike's wife chimed in with suggestions for rearranging the remaining shelves so customers wouldn't notice the broken one right away. The teenage employee tried to salvage as many of the books as he could. For a moment, they all functioned like a team, patching up the immediate aftermath of the Vipers' raid. But as the rain picked up outside, Elisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. This was only the beginning. The Vipers had bigger moves planned. She was sure of it. She caught Jonas's eye and the unspoken question passed between them. When the Vipers push harder, are we truly ready to push back? They finished cleaning, and Elisa left with Jonas, promising Mike they'd do whatever they could. Still, the weight of what could meant hung in the damp air. Up the street, the neon sign for Elisa's kitchen was barely visible in the drizzle, a beacon of uncertain hope in a neighborhood sliding deeper into fear. Elisa and Jonas returned to the diner, where a handful of determined regulars lingered despite the closed sign. Ida from the bakery, Brian from the grocery, Raul the mechanic, and a couple of others stood around a table, murmuring anxiously. When Elisa entered, they looked up with immediate relief and curiosity. Ida spoke first. "We heard what happened at Mike's place. Is he all right?" Elisa set down her umbrella, shaking off droplets. "Shaken, but okay. They wrecked a shelf and threatened him with arson. He's trying to hold it together." A heavy sigh swept across the group. Brian rubbed his temples. "This is escalating fast. I locked my store early today. Just didn't feel safe." Jonas hovered near the door, arms folded, scanning for any eavesdroppers outside. "Mike's camera system is outdated," he said. "We might consider pooling some resources to help each other install better security. Evidence is our best bet." Raul leaned forward. "That's a big expense, especially for some of us barely breaking even. But if it stops them from destroying our livelihoods, I'm in." Ida nodded in agreement, though her eyes were rimmed with worry. "I talked to my husband. He's scared for our kids. Paying $500 a month? Maybe that's just easier than risking our bakery getting burned down. Sorry, Ray." A wave of conflicting emotions passed across the group. It was the same dilemma each business owner faced: pay and hope the criminals leave them in peace, or resist and risk total ruin. Elisa felt the pressure mounting in her chest. She wanted to reassure them that fighting back was the right path, but she also understood that some families simply couldn't afford to gamble with their safety. "That's why we need a unified stand," Jonas asserted, his voice calm yet firm. "Criminals like these succeed when they divide and intimidate. If you all stand together and stay consistent in refusing to pay, it'll be harder for them to single out who to punish. But if one or two pay, the rest become easy targets." The group exchanged glances, uncertainty etched into their faces. Finally, Brian squared his shoulders. "I'm tired of living in fear. I say we do it. No one pays, and we watch each other's backs." A faint ripple of agreement circled the table. Yet Elisa caught Ida biting her lip, her gaze flicking away. She recognized the woman's desperation. Children had a way of raising the stakes. Before anyone could speak further, the diner phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the tense silence. Elisa stepped behind the counter to answer. "Elisa's kitchen." A male voice crackled on the line, muffled but unmistakably menacing. "Chef Pierce," it said, "I hope you're ready to make a deal. You've had your time to think. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" A low chuckle emanated from the phone. "We're the people who keep neighborhoods safe. You've got 24 hours to pay up or shut down. After that, well, let's just say you won't be open for business anymore." A cold burst of adrenaline shot through Elisa's veins. She forced herself to remain composed. "Stop calling. You're harassing us." The line went dead. Elisa set the phone down with slow deliberation, heart hammering. When she looked up, everyone was staring, a silent question in their eyes. What now? She inhaled, steadying herself. "They gave me 24 hours. They'll probably give each of you the same ultimatum." Her eyes flicked to Jonas, then to the anxious faces around the table. "We need to decide if we're going to run or if we're going to stand firm, and we have to decide now." Shinari. The next morning dawned gray and somber, as though the neighborhood itself anticipated looming conflict. Rain spattered intermittently against Elisa's window, and she found herself staring outside, half lost in thought. In the distance, headlights glimmered along the slick roads. She toyed with her phone, checking if there were any missed messages from Mike or the others. None so far. Everyone must be on edge, waiting for the Viper's next move. At exactly 6:30 a.m., she arrived at the diner. Jonas was already there, a cup of coffee in hand, scanning the street from inside. He'd taken to sleeping in a nearby motel, close enough to respond quickly. Elisa offered him a faint smile of gratitude as she unlocked the front door. They went through the motions of opening the diner, switching on lights, powering up the grill, setting out silverware. Despite the tension, life had to move forward. The first customers trickled in, some regulars, others new faces who wandered in for a hot breakfast on a rainy day. The mundane bustle of clinking plates and quiet chatter almost masked the dread that clung to the air like fog. Around 8:01 a.m., Brian showed up, soaked from the drizzle. He shook off water from his umbrella and headed straight to Elisa. "Morning," he greeted, voice strained. "I'm here earlier than usual because, well, I didn't want to be alone in my shop if they show up again." Jonas overheard from behind the counter. "Stick around," he suggested. "Better to have company than to face them alone." They served Brian a steaming mug of coffee, and he settled into a booth by the window. A tense silence stretched among them. Jonas scanned every person who walked by outside, occasionally meeting Elisa's gaze with a subtle nod. No sign of trouble yet, but trouble never arrived with fanfare. Around 9:15, a sleek black SUV eased to a stop across the street. From the diner window, Elisa spotted three men inside, barely visible through tinted windows. Her stomach knotted. The Vipers weren't known for driving fancy cars, so this might be a higher-up or a different crew. Either way, it spelled danger. Jonas rose from his seat, inching closer to the front door. "Stay calm," he murmured. "We don't know if they're coming in or just watching." For several minutes, the SUV idled, wipers swishing back and forth in the drizzle. Then the passenger side door opened, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sleek leather jacket. No snake patch in sight, but his stance radiated authority. He looked up at the neon sign, then strode across the street directly toward the diner's door. All conversation inside died as the bell jangled upon his entrance. His eyes flicked from Jonas to Elisa, then around at the patrons. He wore a calm, almost disconcertingly polite expression. Glancing at Brian, he offered a cool smile, as if recognizing him. "Good morning," he said, in a voice too smooth to be comforting. "I'm here to see Ms. Pierce." Elisa placed down her dish towel and straightened. "You found me." He extended a hand, like a businessman sealing a deal. "Name's Silas. I believe you've met some of my associates. I'd like to have a conversation privately." Jonas stepped forward, but Silas merely raised a brow. "I said privately. Unless you need your friend here to speak for you." Elisa exhaled, glancing at Jonas. He gave her a questioning look. She understood the risk, but also realized refusing could inflame the situation. "All right," she finally said. "My office is in the back." Silas nodded. "Lead the way." Elisa guided Silas through the narrow hallway leading to her modest office, a cramped space doubling as storage for inventory paperwork and extra supplies. She flicked on a small overhead light. The walls were lined with shelves of canned goods and cleaning products, and a battered metal desk stood in one corner. He stepped in, surveying the clutter with a faint curl of his lips. "Quaint," he remarked, as though appraising a property for sale. Elisa closed the door behind them, her pulse picking up speed. She had no idea if Silas was armed or if any more henchmen lurked outside. "Let's keep this short," she said, meeting his gaze. "You want money, right?" Silas offered a measured smile. "Money is a means to an end. What I truly want is order. My associates and I bring stability to neighborhoods in exchange for a fee. Perhaps we approach some of your neighbors in a less than gentle way, but it's business. Nothing personal." Her jaw tightened. "So you vandalize shops, threaten to burn down bookstores, and intimidate innocent people because you think it's your job to keep order. Sounds more like terrorizing than protecting." He lifted a shoulder in a casual shrug. "That's one way to look at it. But consider another perspective. In a city as big as this, you either pay for peace or you struggle in chaos. We ensure peace for a price. We might not wear uniforms, but we are a form of enforcement, and it's profitable when done right." Elisa bristled. The arrogance in his tone reminded her of certain warlords she'd encountered overseas who used intimidation to control entire villages. "I'm not buying it," she said evenly. "Neither are most of the people here." Silas placed his hands in his jacket pockets. "Ah, but they will. Fear can be very persuasive. I'm here now because I prefer a diplomatic approach. The whole smash and burn method? That's not my style. If you convince the others to see reason, I'll keep the more enthusiastic elements in check. She let out a dry laugh. You want me to strong-arm my neighbors into paying protection fees to a criminal gang? His eyes narrowed. I'm proposing a partnership. You have influence among the locals. They trust you. If you back our arrangement, we'll reduce the monthly fee for your diner. Call it a courtesy discount. Everyone wins. Elisa studied him for a long moment, her heart pounding. The idea of siding with these criminals was revolting. Let me be clear. I'm not paying you, and I'm not going to help you extort anyone else. A faint flicker of irritation crossed his face. You'd rather see your neighbors suffer? Maybe they'll blame you for encouraging them to stand firm, even as their businesses go under. She felt her temper flare. We'll take our chances. Silas exhaled through his nose, leveling her with a cold stare. You're making a dangerous mistake, Ms. Pierce. Some of my associates aren't as understanding as I am. When they find out you refused, they'll show no mercy. Elisa held her ground. Get out of my diner. For a moment, neither moved. Then Silas inclined his head, as though granting her a final courtesy, and walked to the door. Pausing with a hand on the knob, he said, This place could have been a real oasis for us. It's a shame. With that, he departed, leaving the small office feeling tighter than ever. Elisa blew out a shaky breath, anger and dread twisting inside her. She had drawn a clear line in the sand, but she knew that meant the next strike would be far more vicious. When Elisa returned to the diner's front room, Jonas was positioned near the entrance, arms tensed at his sides. Brian hovered by the window, peering through the rain-speckled glass at the black SUV idling across the street. A few of Elisa's regulars had left hastily, sensing trouble. The few who remained exchanged anxious glances, uncertain whether they should stay or flee. Elisa shook her head in silent answer to Jonas's unspoken question. He's leaving, she muttered, stepping behind the counter. Through the window, she spotted Silas crossing the street, climbing back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, disappearing into midday traffic. Brian let out a shaky breath. That's the guy in charge? Seems like it, Elisa replied, her voice subdued. He's not the typical street thug either. He's organized, calm, exactly the kind of person who can run a bigger operation. Jonas nodded, brow furrowed. We need to assume they'll retaliate soon. You just told him to take a hike. Elisa steadied herself against the counter, recalling the icy finality in Silas's parting words. He wanted me to help them extort the neighborhood. I refused. Now we wait for the fallout. A tense hush settled over the diner. Brian cleared his throat. So what do we do now? I'm tired of sitting on my hands. Me too, Jonas said, eyes flicking toward the back door. But we can't rush into a brawl. They have numbers, and we don't. Elisa straightened, feeling the weight of her leadership role, even if she hadn't asked for it. We keep gathering intel. I'll reach out to Officer Jackson, let her know who we're dealing with. If Silas is part of a bigger network, maybe the police have a file on him. Meanwhile, we lock up tighter and watch each other's backs. Brian nodded with a grim set to his jaw. I'll go tell Mike and Ida. We can get a network going, so if something happens at one shop, everyone else knows immediately. The plan was far from perfect, but it was all they had. As Brian hustled out into the rain, Jonas turned to Elisa. I can stick around, maybe do a perimeter check, he offered, just in case. Elisa glanced at the few remaining patrons, offering them a reassuring smile. Sorry about the drama, folks, she said. Meals are on the house today. We appreciate your support. There was a collective murmur of gratitude mixed with concern. After the last customer left, Elisa locked the door again. She and Jonas went through the diner, double-checking every window latch and door bolt. Rain tapped at the panes, creating a rhythmic, unsettling backdrop. They ended up in her cramped office, the overhead bulb casting harsh shadows on the shelves. Jonas leaned against the desk. Silas strikes me as someone who doesn't bluff, he said quietly. He'll let his henchmen do the dirty work, but he'll orchestrate it from a safe distance. Elisa pressed her lips together. I've seen that type before. They inspire loyalty through fear and promise big rewards to underlings. He'll have no shortage of people to throw at us. Jonas dipped his head in agreement, then met her eyes. You know what's coming, right? They'll make an example of one of the businesses, maybe even your diner. It won't just be a broken window. It'll be serious. She tried to keep her voice steady. Then we're running on borrowed time. We have to prepare for the worst. Jonas reached out, squeezing her shoulder in a brief gesture of solidarity. We'll do what needs to be done, Lisa. We've come too far to let bullies win now. Despite the dread coursing through her, Elisa felt a pang of determination. If war was at their doorstep, she would not let this neighborhood fall without a fight, even if it meant awakening every last skill she'd tried to leave behind. That evening, the storm intensified, heavy raindrops hammering the pavement, wind gusts rattling trash cans along the street. Most businesses closed earlier than usual, shutters drawn tight against both weather and fear. Elisa, Jonas, and a few regulars spent time in the diner, conversing about patrols, camera installations, and mutual aid. The sense of uneasy camaraderie grew stronger with each shared plan. Around 9 p.m., the diner was nearly empty. Elisa brewed a fresh pot of coffee, offering a cup to Jonas as he checked through text messages from a few neighbors. One message read, "Saw men with jackets scoping out the street near the bakery. Careful." Another reported suspicious cars loitering near Brian's grocery. "It's like they're everywhere," Jonas said, frowning at the phone screen. "Could be they're waiting for the storm to die down before making a move." Elisa nodded, glancing out the window. Sheets of rain blurred the view. "I hate not knowing when they'll strike," she murmured, arms crossed. Just then her phone buzzed. She snatched it up. Officer Jackson's number. "Hello?" "Ms. Pierce," Jackson's voice came through, laced with static from the weather. "I looked into this Silas person. He's linked to a larger syndicate operating across several boroughs. We've had difficulty pinning charges on him. He keeps his hands clean." Elisa exchanged a quick glance with Jonas. "So you can't arrest him yet?" A weary sigh crackled through. "We don't have enough. If we had solid evidence, like a recorded threat or transaction, that would help. Until then, our hands are tied." A pause then. "Try not to antagonize him, okay? We don't want civilian casualties." Elisa grimaced. "Too late for that. He's already threatened to destroy businesses, maybe worse." Jackson's tone turned grim. "Stay safe. Document everything. Call us if they show up again. We'll respond as fast as we can." When the call ended, Elisa set the phone down, frustration welling up. "They can't do anything yet," she relayed to Jonas. "We're basically on our own, just like we feared." Jonas ran a hand through his hair. "This is the worst-case scenario. Criminals with enough influence to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. They'll escalate because they know the police can't intervene decisively." Elisa said nothing, but her mind churned with a mix of anger and dread. In the Marines, she had clear rules of engagement, a chain of command, backup, air support if necessary. Here she had a handful of neighbors, an old friend, and minimal resources. Around 10 p.m., they decided to close the diner. Jonas insisted on walking Elisa to her apartment. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the wind whipped sideways rain into their faces as they hurried along the darkened streets. The glow of street lamps cast flickering pools of light that revealed more emptiness than comfort. A few cars rumbled by, headlights slicing through the gloom. Halfway there, they heard a muffled shout from a side alley. Elisa stiffened. Jonas gestured for her to stay put, but she followed anyway, instincts flaring. They rounded a corner, stepping over puddles, and found two men in hooded jackets cornering a frightened teenage boy. Elisa recognized him, one of the grocery's part-time staff. "Back off," Jonas barked, voice cutting through the rain. The men spun around, tension crackling in the tight space. Even in the dark, Elisa saw the faint outline of the coiled snake patch on one jacket. The Vipers. One of them spat on the ground. "This kid owes us a message for Brian. The old man's behind on his payments." Elisa clenched her fists. "He's just a kid. Leave him alone." A spark of defiance flared in the man's eyes. No freebies in this neighborhood anymore. Before Elisa could speak, Jonas moved like lightning, stepping between the men and the boy. In a swift motion, he grabbed the arm of the nearest thug, twisting it behind his back. The second thug lunged, but Elisa blocked him with a quick sidestep, adrenaline surging. The alley erupted with shouts and the splash of water as they struggled. Elisa's heart pounded, fully aware that any misstep could escalate to lethal force. Something she desperately wanted to avoid. but the Vipers showed no sign of backing down. Jonas held the first thug in a firm lock, pressing him face first against the wet brick wall. Raindrops streamed down their bodies, making every motion slippery and dangerous. The second thug swung wildly at Elisa. She ducked the first swing, pivoting on her heel to maintain balance. Her Marine training roared back into focus. She remembered countless drills in hand-to-hand combat, the measured angles of blocking a strike, the precise moment to counter. Yet a storm-lashed alley in Brooklyn wasn't a controlled training ring. Her foot slipped on wet pavement, nearly sending her sprawling. The thug seized the moment, tackling her against the wall. Pain flared through her shoulder, but she gritted her teeth and brought her knee up sharply into his gut. He grunted, stumbling back. Elisa took the opening to slam her forearm across his collarbone, forcing him down into a puddle. Water splashed, drenching them both further. In the confusion, Jonas's captive managed to elbow him in the ribs and break free. Jonas staggered but recovered quickly, crouching into a defensive stance. The two thugs regrouped, breathing hard. The kid they'd been harassing huddled near a dumpster, eyes wide with terror. Thunder rumbled overhead, punctuating the tense standoff. The first thug lifted a hand to his mouth, spitting out blood. "Who are you people?" he snarled. "We're the ones who aren't going to let you bully a teenager," Jonas shot back, voice low and lethal. "Now get out of here." Honoré, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the thug's face. They'd clearly expected easy prey, not seasoned fighters. Yet pride and anger simmered in their eyes. After a tense heartbeat, they made a silent agreement. With a last glare, both thugs turned and ran, disappearing into the night. Elisa exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her throbbing shoulder. Jonas moved to check on her. "You okay?" She winced. "Fine. Just bruised." Her gaze shifted to the trembling boy. "Hey, you're safe now. Did they hurt you?" The kid shook his head, eyes watering with relief. "No, just threatened me. I didn't know what to do." "Go home," Jonas advised gently. "Let Brian know what happened, and tell him to be careful." Nodding, the boy sprinted off, splashing through puddles until he vanished around the corner. Elisa sighed, muscles quivering with spent adrenaline. The savage weather battered them as they stood in the alley, catching their breath. Jonas glanced around, his expression grim. "They'll report this back to Silas. We just beat up 2 of his foot soldiers." Elisa swiped rainwater from her face. "We didn't have a choice. They were terrorizing that kid." A swirl of emotions collided inside her. Anger at the thugs, fear for the retaliation that might follow, and a grim satisfaction that she hadn't forgotten how to defend the innocent. "Come on," Jonas said, gesturing toward the main street. "We should get you home before more of them show up." They walked in tense silence, every shadow seeming to twitch with potential menace. By the time they reached Elisa's apartment building, their clothes were drenched and muddy. Inside the small lobby, the fluorescent lights flickered, revealing bruises forming on both of them. Jonas touched the darkening mark on his ribs and grunted. "Guess we should have gone for something less dramatic, but it's done. You sure you'll be all right?" Elisa managed a tired smile. "I'll live. Lock up tight at your motel. We'll regroup in the morning." He nodded, giving her a once-over, as if to ensure she wasn't more injured than she let on. With a final nod, he stepped back into the night. Elisa watched him go, heart heavy. Their scuffle had prevented immediate harm to a kid, but it also flung them deeper into the Viper's crosshairs. The storm outside felt symbolic, a raging backdrop to the conflict that was about to surge even higher. Morning brought a gray sky and lingering drizzle, but the storm's worst fury had passed. Elisa woke with a stiff shoulder, the bruise a stark reminder of the previous night's brawl. After a quick shower and a few painkillers, she slipped on her apron and headed to the diner. Her footsteps echoed against the damp pavement, and the neighborhood felt subdued, as though bracing for the next blow. She found Jonas already there, sipping coffee by the counter. The diner was otherwise empty, save for a lone, sleepy-eyed patron hunched over a plate of eggs. "You look about as good as I feel," Jonas said wryly, noting the tension in her stance. Elisa gingerly rotated her shoulder. "Could be worse. Any news?" He set down his mug. "I checked my phone all night, but nothing new from our neighbors. That might be good or bad. I did hear from Officer Jackson." She said if we want to press charges for assault, we need to come in and file a report. Elisa grimaced. Filing a report means openly admitting we fought the Vipers. That'll escalate things. Yeah, Jonas sighed. But not filing means they get away with it. Then again, the odds of them facing real consequences are slim without more evidence. The security cameras in that alley are probably garbage, if they even exist. She flipped the closed sign to open, letting out a long breath. We'll hold off for now. Let's see how the day goes. As the morning progressed, a few customers trickled in. A pair of exhausted nurses just off the night shift, an elderly couple seeking refuge from the chilly damp. Each asked some variation of, "Heard about the troubles in the neighborhood? Everything okay?" Elisa offered her best reassuring smile, pouring coffee and flipping pancakes with smooth efficiency. She felt a sense of responsibility to keep the diner a beacon of normalcy in the face of chaos. Yet beneath her calm surface, tension coiled tight. Around midday, Brian and Ida arrived together, anxiety etched into their features. They took seats at the counter, voices low. I was at the grocery early, Brian said, and these men were hanging around outside. Looked like they were waiting for something. They left after a while, but I'm guessing they'll be back. Ida nodded, eyes wide. I got a call at the bakery this morning, a threatening voice on the other end saying, if we don't pay by tomorrow, we'll regret it. Jonas leaned in. They're pushing a final ultimatum. They probably heard about last night and want to clamp down. Elisa set down a plate of sandwiches, her mind whirling. We can't give in now. If we pay, they'll just keep draining us. But if we don't, they'll escalate. A heavy silence settled. Finally, Brian exhaled. So we stand our ground? Ida trembled slightly. I'm scared, but I won't go behind anyone's back. If we fold now, it's over. Elisa glanced at Jonas. She saw the same resolve she felt mirrored in his eyes. Then we stand, she said, voice firm. Together. They formed a loose plan, more frequent check-ins, a rotating schedule of vigilance so shops wouldn't be left entirely alone, especially at opening or closing times. Jonas volunteered to help Ida secure her bakery's rear entrance, while Brian planned to install a better camera system. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Still, as the day wore on, Elisa couldn't shake the sense of impending crisis. Silas's calm threat replayed in her mind. Some of my associates aren't as understanding as I am. Wechiwanori. That dark promise weighed on her every time the diner's door swung open, reminding her that a storm far worse than last night's rain could be just around the corner. Late that afternoon, a relative lull settled over the diner, giving Elisa and Jonas a moment to reflect. The constant tension, the quickened heartbeats every time a customer walked in, the discreet glances at suspicious cars parked outside. It was all starting to wear on them. Yet in the hush, Elisa recognized the grit of the community's resolve. Most had chosen not to pay the Vipers, and that solidarity emboldened her. Jonas's phone buzzed, cutting through the calm. He answered quickly. Yeah? Slow down. Mike? Hey, talk to me. Elisa set down a coffee pot, anxiety tightening her chest as she watched Jonas's face. His expression darkened. We're on our way, he said, hanging up. What happened? Elisa demanded. Jonas stuffed his phone into his jacket. Mike said something's going down at his bookstore. A group of Vipers is outside, harassing him, claiming he's spreading anti-protection propaganda. He thinks they're about to do real damage. Without another word, they locked up the diner and rushed out. The day's gloom mirrored their sense of urgency, clouds hanging low as they half ran, half jogged down the block. City life continued around them, pedestrians hurrying on errands, car horns blaring, oblivious or willfully ignoring the danger lurking on this quiet street. When they reached the bookstore, they found 4 thugs loitering out front, snickering among themselves while one of them defaced a sign in the window with spray paint. A shaky Mike stood in the doorway, torn between defending his store and risking a fight. A small crowd had gathered at a distance, phones held up to record, but no one dared intervene. Jonas, being the larger presence, stepped forward first. That's enough, he barked. Leave him alone. One of the Vipers turned, a grin spreading across his face. Oh, look who it is. The tough guy from the alley, right? He tossed the spray can aside, stepping menacingly toward Jonas. You messing with our business again? Elisa placed a hand on Mike's arm, guiding him back into the bookstore. Go inside, she whispered. Don't provoke them. Jonas and I will handle this. Mike swallowed hard but complied, retreating into the safety of the doorway. Meanwhile, the thugs closed in on Jonas. The tallest of the group pointed at him. You got in a scuffle with our boys last night. Word travels fast. Looks like you want to play hero, huh? Jonas didn't flinch. I just want you gone. Another thug laughed, a harsh sound. Too bad. We ain't leaving until we get what we came for. This store owes a month's fee, plus a penalty for messing with us. Elisa stepped beside Jonas, her presence drawing the men's attention. She could feel their malice, practically taste the electric crackle of looming violence. In her peripheral vision, she saw some of the crowd still filming. Maybe that footage could help, but right now things were dangerously close to physical confrontation. The lead thug sneered at Elisa. Chef lady, you must love cleaning up other people's messes. Maybe you can mop up Mike's place after we trash it. He took a step closer, brandishing a metal baton he pulled from inside his jacket. Jonas tensed, but before he could react, Elisa spoke in a controlled, level tone. You want to do this in front of all these cameras? She tilted her head toward the onlookers, many with phones raised. Because that's a lot of evidence for the cops. For a moment, hesitation wavered across the men's faces. Their bravado collided with the reality that an outright assault on camera could bring heavier charges. But the one with the baton spat, phones won't save you. Half the time, those videos disappear, or the cops lose them. Elisa knew that was often how it went. Still, she held her ground. Jonas edged closer, stance guarded. The crowd edged forward, some murmuring encouragement, others just wanting a dramatic shot. This confrontation teetered on a knife's edge, and everyone knew it. The tension snapped when the baton-wielding thug lunged at Jonas, swinging in a vicious arc. Jonas reacted with a swift block, forearm meeting metal, the impact jarring his entire body. He hissed in pain but kept his footing. The other Vipers surged forward, fists raised, ready to swarm. Elisa stepped in, adrenaline surging through her veins. She seized the arm of one thug who tried to flank Jonas, twisting it until he yelped. The move sent the baton clattering to the ground. A second thug threw a wild punch at her, and she dodged, retaliating with a sharp palm strike to his sternum. The violence was clumsy compared to her military training, but it was dangerous enough in these cramped quarters. Mike, from within the bookstore, shouted, "Stop! You'll ruin everything!" But his voice was drowned out by the scuffle. The onlookers gasped and pressed in for a better view, their phones capturing every swing, every shouted curse. Jonas wrestled with two of the men, grappling to prevent them from landing solid blows. Despite his strength, the baton had rattled him, and the weight of their combined force threatened to topple him. Elisa broke away from her own struggle, diving in to help. She wrapped an arm around one thug's neck, dragging him off Jonas with a grunt of effort. The last thug, momentarily stunned by the sudden resistance, locked eyes with Elisa. She saw the hatred burning there, the raw frustration that the neighborhood wasn't rolling over. With a snarl, he shoved past Jonas and charged at her. She braced herself for impact, but at the last second, a voice boomed through the chaos. "Freeze! NYPD!" Officer Jackson and another uniformed officer burst through the crowd, guns drawn, forcing the Vipers to halt. The sudden presence of law enforcement sent a shockwave through the onlookers, who scattered back to make room. Jonas straightened, breathing hard, while Elisa wiped sweat from her brow. One of the thugs backed away slowly, hands raised in feigned innocence. "We were just defending ourselves," he spat. "They attacked us first." Jackson's partner quickly moved to secure the baton from the sidewalk, while Jackson glared at the men. "We've got witnesses and cameras that might tell a different story. Line up against the wall." The four Vipers complied under the threat of drawn weapons, grumbling curses. The baton wielder cradled his bruised wrist, shooting venomous glances at Elisa and Jonas. Elisa's heart pounded in her chest, relief mingled with the cold realization that this too was an escalation. Handcuffs or no handcuffs, the gang would hold them responsible. Jackson gestured for Elisa and Jonas to move aside. "Either of you hurt?" she asked, lowering her weapon. Elisa flexed her aching shoulder. "Bruises, maybe, nothing major." She scanned Jonas, who gave a curt nod. "All good, he confirmed. "They started it." Jackson exhaled, looking both relieved and exasperated. We'll arrest these guys for assault, see if we can hold them. But you know how it is. If they make bail, they'll be back on the streets. And Silas isn't here." Elisa spat a bitter laugh. "Of course not. He keeps his hands clean." Still, the small victory felt significant. The crowd of onlookers relaxed, some murmuring approval as the police cuffed the Vipers. Officer Jackson's partner read them their rights in a bored monotone. Sirens grew louder in the distance, signaling backup or transport to the station. Amid the bustle, Mike emerged from his bookstore, his expression a mix of gratitude and shock. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling. "They would have... I don't even want to think about it." Jonas placed a reassuring hand on the store owner's shoulder. "It's not over yet," he warned softly, "but at least you're safe for now." Elisa nodded, gazing at the battered storefront sign and the fresh spray paint dripping onto the sidewalk. A storm of emotions churned inside her: relief, anger, dread. The Vipers had taken a punch today, but they were far from defeated. And if Silas was watching from somewhere in the shadows, planning his next move, she had no doubt it would be bigger and more brutal. The aftermath of the brawl outside Mike's bookstore left the neighborhood on edge. Though Officer Jackson and her partner had managed to arrest a few Viper thugs, it was widely known that Silas himself was still at large. Rumors circulated that bail would be posted quickly for those arrested, meaning the gang would be back on the streets, angrier and more determined to teach a lesson to anyone who defied them. Elisa spent the rest of that night cleaning her diner in a haze. She scrubbed counters, wiped tables, reorganized the shelves in her cramped back office. Anything to keep busy and blunt the knot of anxiety in her chest. Jonas had stayed until closing, but even his presence didn't fully soothe her nerves. The confrontation was far from over. Every victory they notched only served to goad Silas into coming back stronger. The next morning, a tense calm blanketed the block. The sky hung low with thick clouds threatening another downpour. Most shops opened later than usual, their owners jittery about possible reprisals. Brian from the grocery had installed a new security camera, and Mike had replaced the vandalized sign in front of his bookstore. A few encouraging nods and whispered thanks followed Elisa as she walked past. Neighbors recognized her and Jonas as the reason some of the Vipers had been momentarily taken off the streets. But the expression she received carried an underlying question. Can you keep us safe if they return? By midday, her diner felt unusually empty. Where she once bustled around, serving a steady flow of regulars, now only a handful of dedicated patrons trickled in. The community's fears affected their daily routines. Many simply stayed home, hoping to avoid trouble altogether. Lost in thought as she refilled a sugar dispenser, Elisa nearly missed the vibration of her phone in her apron pocket. It was Officer Jackson. Her voice came through tense and crackling. "Ms. Pierce, I've got news. 2 of the men we arrested posted bail an hour ago. The third is still locked up on a prior warrant, but that might not last. We're trying to track down Silas, but he's covering his tracks. Watch your back." Elisa thanked her and ended the call, her heart racing. She glanced at Jonas, who read her expression with a resigned nod. "They're out?" he asked. She didn't even need to explain. It was obvious from her tight grimace. "Yeah, and no trace of Silas," she murmured. "I guess we should expect retaliation soon." Jonas sighed. "We can't be everywhere at once. This block might turn into a battleground if we're not careful." He paused, then added, "I've been thinking, maybe we need to talk with your neighbors about a real plan for defense. Not just cameras or phone trees, but physical security. If Silas plans an all-out attack to scare everyone, we need to be ready." Elisa stared at the deserted tables, remembering how she once dreamed this diner would be a place of refuge and comfort. Now it felt like a forward operating base in enemy territory. She set down the sugar dispenser with a sharp clink. "Let's do it," she said firmly. "Gather anyone willing to help. If we wait around, we'll be sitting ducks." In her mind's eye, she could almost see the old war zone, the swirling dust, the echo of gunfire. It rattled her to realize how easily her thoughts slipped into military strategy. But life had forced her hand again, and though she hadn't wanted to go back to that mindset, the neighborhood needed her at her sharpest. No more half measures, she told herself. We either stand together or we lose everything. By late afternoon, Elise and Jonas had rallied a small group in the back room of the diner. The buzz of the fluorescent light overhead set a stark tone. reminiscent of the briefing rooms Elisa once occupied in desert compounds. A sense of urgency crackled in the air, and no one sat idly. They gathered around a makeshift table cluttered with city maps, camera footage screenshots, and a list of local businesses. Mike, Ida, Brian, Raoul the mechanic, and a few others who had openly refused to pay the Vipers stood shoulder to shoulder. Their faces were etched with fatigue and tension, but also a faint glimmer of resolve. Officer Jackson had wanted to attend, but she was stuck at the precinct, juggling official duties and bureaucratic constraints. She did, however, send a text offering advice. Keep everything lawful. Don't give them grounds to spin this on you. Jonas cleared his throat, adopting a tone that was halfway between friend and squad leader. We're not forming a militia or anything, he said, but we need to be organized. The Vipers are definitely planning something big. People like Silas don't take public humiliation lightly. Elisa stepped forward, pressing her palm against the map spread out on the table. She'd circled key points: the diner, Mike's bookstore, Brian's grocery, Ida's bakery, Raoul's garage, and a few other shops that refused to pay. These places are the most likely targets, she explained. If they hit one, they'll want to make an example out of it, to scare the rest of us. Ida bit her lip. So we just wait around, hoping we can catch them in the act? Not exactly. Elisa glanced at Jonas. He nodded, encouraging her to continue. We'll set up a schedule. Volunteers will keep watch at these critical locations during vulnerable times. Early morning openings and after dark mainly. We'll rotate so no one's left alone and no one's out there every single night. Brian rubbed his eyes, exhaustion showing. I can do a few shifts at my grocery. Raoul said he'd help too. Raoul chimed in. Sure will. If they show up at the garage, I'm not letting them trash my place without a fight. Mike swallowed, still shaken from the recent vandalism. What if they come in large numbers, or with weapons? Jonas answered, voice steady. That's why we have to coordinate. We can't match them thug for thug, but we can communicate. Texts, calls. If you spot trouble, you alert everyone else. The cops might be slow, but if we can gather enough neighbors in a hurry, the Vipers might back off. Bullies don't like when they're outnumbered. The notion of a communal defense resonated, but unease lingered. Elisa tapped her phone. We'll create a group chat. Keep messages short, direct, just location and threat level. If someone types red alert or something similar, we drop what we're doing and head over. A few nods traveled around the group. None of this was foolproof. The Vipers had vehicles, resources, and a willingness to use violence. But at least the neighbors wouldn't be sitting ducks, each isolated and waiting to be picked off. As they finalized the schedule, Elisa's mind drifted to her locked drawer in the back office. The firearm she'd kept hidden for so long suddenly felt like a looming question. Should she arm herself just in case? The moral weight pressed down on her. She believed in protecting her neighbors, but the thought of shedding blood on her own street, in front of people she served daily meals to, twisted her stomach. Okay, Jonas concluded, scanning the determined faces. We start tonight. Everybody stay in pairs if you can, and keep your phones charged. They dispersed shortly after, each taking a slip of paper with their assigned shifts and crucial phone numbers. As they filed out of the diner, Elisa watched them with a blend of pride and trepidation. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians with day jobs and families, forced into a defense none of them had asked for. Yet here they were, banding together under her guidance. If she was going to step back into the mindset of a warrior, at least it would be to defend good people. Night fell with a hush, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic and the patter of a light drizzle. Elisa and Jonas took the first patrol shift, though it was less a patrol and more a discreet watchfulness. They stationed themselves near the diner's front windows, lights dimmed, carefully observing the street. A handful of neighbors did the same at their shops, pairs rotating every few hours. Elisa's phone sat on the counter, volume turned up. They'd agreed on a single code phrase for immediate danger: now or never. If someone texted that, all watchers would converge on the threatened location and call the police. It was rudimentary, but better than relying on random chance. Half an hour in, Jonas broke the silence. You know, we could have chosen easier paths. You with a successful diner and a quiet life. Me drifting between security gigs. Why do we always end up on the front line? She huffed a wry laugh. I guess old habits die hard. Or maybe we just can't ignore people in need. Jonas nodded slowly. What about your guns, Lisa? Have you considered keeping one within reach in case? She sighed, turning to face him. I have. But crossing that line, this is my home. I didn't want to bring violence into it. Her voice trailed off, conflicted. He laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I get it. But the Vipers might bring violence whether we like it or not. At least if you're armed, you can protect yourself and others without waiting on the cops. Her stomach twisted at the memory of how many times she'd pulled a trigger before. She never liked it, but in war, she accepted it. Did she have it in her to do that again on U.S. soil, in her own neighborhood? Before she could answer, movement in the street caught their attention. A black sedan glided down the block, slowing as it neared the diner. Elisa's heart hammered. Through the dim light, she couldn't see who was inside. Jonas tensed beside her, body poised for action. The car paused, idling for a few moments, then rolled away. A subtle reconnaissance mission, perhaps, or a mere coincidence. But neither believed in coincidences anymore. They breathed a mutual sigh of relief when the sedan continued down the avenue, disappearing into the night. The phone remained silent. No distress text from the others. Still, Elisa's pulse stayed elevated. The tension was like a coiled spring in her chest, an echo of the vigil she kept years ago in desert outposts. Around midnight, her phone buzzed, startling them both. She grabbed it quickly, only to see a routine message from Brian. All quiet here. Heading home. Elisa exhaled, texting back a thumbs up. That sense of calm was a double-edged sword. It might simply mean the Vipers were waiting to strike when everyone's guard was down. Eventually, their shift ended, and Jonas insisted on walking Elisa to her apartment. The same winding route, the same uneasy glances at darkened alleys and parked cars. She invited him upstairs, offering a couch if he wanted to stay. But he declined, opting to remain at his motel in case he needed to jump into action for another shift. After a brief goodbye, she watched him vanish into the shadows. Alone in her apartment, Elisa struggled with a swirl of emotions. From her bedroom closet, she pulled out a locked case and keyed in the combination. The metal clicked open, revealing her old sidearm, a 9mm pistol, well-maintained but dormant for months. Her heart pounded as she held it, the weight both familiar and jarring. After a moment, she locked it away again, unwilling to decide just yet. Tomorrow, she told herself, I'll sort it out. But in her gut, she knew that tomorrow might offer no choice at all, only necessity. Morning arrived with no major incidents reported, leaving the neighborhood in a strange state of relief mixed with dread. Elisa opened the diner at her usual hour, flipping the sign from closed to open under the first rays of a pale sunrise. She felt physically drained, too little sleep, too many restless thoughts. Yet she pressed on, pouring coffee for the early bird customers and trying to muster a friendly smile. The day passed relatively smoothly until late afternoon, when Mike burst through the diner door, eyes wide with panic. His hair was disheveled, shirt plastered to his back with sweat. Elisa immediately abandoned her station at the grill and hurried over. What happened? She asked, voice tight. Mike took a moment to catch his breath. I heard from one of my regulars that a suspicious group was checking out my bookstore earlier. They were asking neighbors where I live, if I have family, all sorts of personal questions. Jonas, who happened to be in the diner fixing a loose table leg, rose to his feet. They're trying to get leverage, he muttered. Personal threats, typical intimidation move. Mike nodded, trembling. My wife's visiting her sister in Queens for a few days, so she's safe, but I'm worried they might track her down or something. Elisa laid a hand on Mike's shoulder, trying to steady him. We'll take precautions. Keep us updated on any strange calls or messages. She exchanged a glance with Jonas. They both understood that this escalation was psychological warfare. Strike at the heart of someone's life, and you break their resolve. As the afternoon wore on, more unsettling tidbits floated in. Ida discovered graffiti scrawled on her bakery's delivery van, reading "Time's Up." Brian's grocery reportedly had a couple of shady men loitering outside, never buying anything, just staring. Each incident sharpened the community's anxiety like a whetstone. Finally, around 6:01 p.m., Officer Jackson stopped by, her uniform damp from an unexpected rain shower. She pulled Elisa aside near the diner's kitchen, her voice low. There's chatter that Silas might be planning something big soon, a raid, a coordinated attack, something that sends a message he's still in control. Elisa's stomach clenched. Where'd you hear that? Jackson frowned. Street informants, some partial leads from the guys we arrested, though none of them will admit to anything substantial. They're tight-lipped. But we've heard rumor of a show of force to make the arrests look futile. Jonas joined them, catching the tail end of Jackson's warning. Any chance your precinct can send more patrols? She sighed, tension lines evident around her eyes. I requested it, but we're stretched thin. We'll do what we can, but I can't promise we'll have a cop on every corner. Elisa inwardly cursed the bureaucracy that left them vulnerable. All right, she said, jaw set. We'll keep watch ourselves. Before Jackson left, she offered a final piece of advice. If something big goes down, call 911 immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. Elisa forced a grim smile. We'll try not to, but you know how fast these things move. The officer nodded somberly. Yeah, be safe, Miss Pierce. When Jackson was gone, Elisa and Jonas huddled with Brian and a few other neighbors who had gathered at the diner for an impromptu meal. The news of a possible show of force rattled everyone. They discussed ramping up nighttime vigilance, even contemplating whether to keep shops closed for a day or two. Yet closing down entirely would be another Viper victory. As the rain pattered against the diner windows, Elisa's mind churned with strategy. She pictured the vantage points, escape routes, fallback positions, tactics she once used in military operations. More and more, it felt like she was planning a defensive stand in hostile territory. She just hoped they could avoid lethal violence. But with Silas pushing every button, that hope was getting harder to hold on to. Dusk settled over the neighborhood with a heavy, oppressive weight. The forecast called for intermittent thunderstorms, and flashes of distant lightning illuminated the skyline. Elisa found herself staring out the diner's windows as she prepared to shut down early, scanning for any unusual activity along the street. A handful of neighbors, those who'd volunteered for nighttime watch, drifted in, seeking a warm beverage before taking up their posts. Mike showed up again, looking slightly steadier than before. Ida arrived with her husband, who had come to protect the bakery. Brian lingered, fiddling with a flashlight he'd just bought. None of them wanted to face the night alone. Jonas had disappeared briefly to collect something from his motel. When he returned, he carried a small duffel bag that Elisa recognized. It was his old gear bag, from the days he worked private security after leaving the Marines. He set it behind the counter, face grim. She raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Jonas gave a curt nod. Nothing lethal, just some protective gear. Batons, pepper spray, a Kevlar vest or two. If things get bad, I'd rather we have options. Elisa pressed her lips together, then exhaled. All right, let's hope we don't need it. She glanced around at the neighbors, their expressions torn between relief and apprehension. We'll divide up. Some of you stay in pairs outside your shops. Others patrol the block in a car. Keep your phones ready. Mike hesitated. What about you, Elisa? Where will you be? She looked out at the rain-streaked street. Jonas and I will watch from the diner for now. It's central, and if anything happens, we can get there fast. An uneasy agreement settled among them. Brian and Raul would circle the block in Raul's pickup truck. Ida and her husband would stay at the bakery, lights on, doors locked, eyes peeled. Mike decided to remain in his bookstore with a friend, determined not to let fear close him down. Each pair had numbers to call, a time to check in. It was as thorough a plan as a group of civilians could muster. Just before they dispersed, a hush fell. Each person looked to Elisa, as if awaiting final reassurance. She swallowed the knot in her throat. We got this, she said softly, forcing steadiness into her voice. We stand together, okay? They nodded in unison, a fragile circle of trust and hope. Then they filtered out into the night, bracing themselves against the drizzle and the lurking shadows. Elisa locked the diner doors, though leaving the open sign dark. She and Jonas settled near the front windows. Lights dimmed, chairs stacked on tables. The diner felt eerily empty. No aroma of hot food, no chatter of patrons. Only the soft rumble of thunder and the occasional beep from her phone. Time crept by. Each minute felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Elisa glanced repeatedly at her group chat, half expecting the dreaded code phrase, now or never. But for a while, nothing came. Streetlights flickered, silhouettes passed by, but no sign of the Vipers. Shortly after midnight, her phone buzzed. She jolted to check it, relief flooding, when she saw it was a routine update from Brian. Quiet so far. Maybe they're not coming. Elisa typed back a quick, "Stay vigilant." She shared the message with Jonas, who nodded but didn't relax. In the dim diner, they took turns pacing or standing guard by the window. Eventually, Jonas drifted into a memory, speaking softly. "Remember that night we held a watch post near the desert cliffs? No movement for hours, then right at dawn, everything broke loose." Elisa winced. "I remember. That's exactly what worries me." Sometimes the quiet night was the prelude to a dawn assault. But this time, the enemy wasn't across a battlefield. It was here at home, among unsuspecting civilians. Her phone remained silent, but her heart refused to calm. The Vipers might have chosen another night, or another target. Or maybe, just maybe, they were gathering in force, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and remind everyone who truly ran this neighborhood. At 3:11 a.m., the tension inside the diner was nearly suffocating. The drizzle had intensified to a steady downpour, and wind gusts rattled the windows. Elisa's eyes burned from staring into the darkness, her mind conjuring threats in every shifting shadow. Jonas leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. Both of them were running on caffeine and sheer determination. With no alarm sounding, they momentarily considered the possibility that the Vipers had postponed their attack. Then Elisa's phone buzzed, twice. She snatched it up, hard in her throat. It was a text from Raul. "Suspicious van near bakery. Lights off. We're parking a block away." Her pulse accelerated. "Raul sees something near Ida's bakery," she informed Jonas. "Lights off in a van. That's not good." Jonas grabbed his duffel bag. "We go." Elisa didn't hesitate. "We go." She quickly typed a response. "On our way. Keep distance. Watch for movement." Then she pulled her rain jacket off a hook by the door, nodding for Jonas to follow. They slipped out into the storm, locking the diner behind them. Under the glow of sporadic streetlights, they jogged through puddles, the rain drenching their clothes. The bakery was 5 blocks away, a short trek that felt endless in the twisting gloom. As they approached, they saw Raul's pickup parked with headlights off. Brian sat in the passenger seat, peering through the windshield. Elisa tapped on the window. "Where is it?" she asked, voice low. Raul pointed to a nondescript gray van idling across from the bakery, about 30 yards down the street. "It's been there for 10 minutes, engine running, but no one gets out. Ida texted me. She sees shadows inside, maybe 2 or 3 guys." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Could be Vipers checking if the bakery's wide open, or maybe they're waiting for backup." A flash of lightning lit the street, momentarily exposing the silhouettes inside the van. Elisa's heart lurched at the sight of a glint that could be a weapon. "We can't just let them pounce on Ida," she muttered. Raul tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "So we confront them?" Jonas laid a hand on the duffel bag. "We do it carefully. If they're armed, we can't charge in blind. We need to see what we're dealing with." Elisa chewed her lip, glancing at the bakery's windows. She could just make out Ida's face peering through a gap in the curtains, worry etched there. This had to be resolved. Swallowing hard, she gestured for Jonas to join her on foot. "Let's approach from the side. Stay out of the headlights. Raul, you and Brian stay here. Call the police, but be ready to move if we need help." Raul nodded, already dialing. Lightning flickered again, thunder booming overhead. Elisa and Jonas crept along the sidewalk, hugging the building facades for cover. Their hearts pounded in sync with each step. 20 yards from the van, they flattened against the wall of a closed hardware store. Rain slashed at their faces. Jonas unzipped his duffel, retrieving pepper spray and a baton. He pressed them into Elisa's hands, then armed himself likewise. Neither wanted to brandish firearms unless absolutely necessary, mindful of the risk to neighbors. They peered around the corner. Inside the van, faint silhouettes shifted, possibly 3 men. Jonas whispered, "We move in slow, keep some distance. If they jump out with guns, we retreat and hope the police are close." Elisa's grip on the baton was slick with rain. Her marine instincts screamed caution, but her desire to protect Ida fueled her courage. She gave Jonas a terse nod, and they edged closer, step by step, bracing for the worst. In the flickering street lamp glow, the van felt like a crouched predator waiting to spring, and they were about to knock on its door. Elisa and Jonas managed to close the distance until they were just a few feet from the van's side door. The engine idled, its low rumble blending with the hiss of rain. She caught a glimpse of movement through the windshield, someone shifting in the driver's seat. The tension in her chest felt like a vice, each heartbeat pounding in her ears. Jonas gave her a silent hand signal. Wait. Observe. Years of joint operations allowed them to communicate with minimal gestures. Together, they crouched behind a parked sedan, peeking over the trunk to watch. Another flicker of lightning revealed a partial profile of the driver, a man with a shaved head scanning the street. Then abruptly, the van's side door slid open. Two figures hopped out, staying low to avoid the streetlights. They carried dark objects that could be tools or possibly weapons. Elisa strained her eyes, trying to discern details through the downpour. The men moved toward the rear entrance of the bakery, footsteps splashing in shallow puddles. Her phone buzzed faintly. She glanced down. Ida had sent one frantic message. "They're at the back door." A spike of adrenaline shot through Elisa. She motioned to Jonas. Time to move. They advanced swiftly, keeping behind parked cars. The two men had already disappeared around the corner of the bakery's building. The driver remained in the van, presumably acting as lookout or getaway. Jonas gestured for Elisa to approach the driver's side, while he circled to intercept the men near the back. It was a risky split, but their best chance to stop both threats at once. Creeping up to the driver's window, Elisa could see the man fixated on something inside the van, maybe a phone or a radio. Her pulse thundered as she raised the baton. Just incapacitate him. No lethal force, she reminded herself. In one fluid motion, she rapped on the glass with the baton. The driver jerked in surprise, eyes wide. "Out of the van," she commanded, voice firm. Rain streamed down her face, water droplets clinging to her eyelashes. For a split second, he froze, possibly calculating his odds. Then he slammed the gear shift, intending to speed off. Elisa lunged, yanking the door open before he could lock it. Pepper spray at the ready. He growled, swinging a fist at her, but she ducked, pressing the nozzle and spraying a short burst. The confined space turned into a choking haze as the man let out a guttural yell, his eyes burning. Elisa yanked him out of the driver's seat, knees wobbling on slick pavement. He tried to claw at her, but the pepper spray had disoriented him. With a grunt, she slammed the door shut to prevent him from scrambling back in and gunning the engine. Another quick strike with the baton forced him to drop to a knee, sputtering curses. Meanwhile, from the back alley, she heard a scuffle and Jonas's voice shouting, "Stop! Get down!" A strangled cry followed, then a clang of metal tools hitting concrete. Her anxiety soared, but she had to secure the driver first. Zip ties, she thought, rummaging for the flexible restraints Jonas had tucked in the duffel. Rain plastered her hair to her face, making it hard to see. Finally, she managed to yank the man's arms behind him, binding his wrists. With the driver restrained and half-blinded by pepper spray, Elisa dashed toward the alley. She found Jonas struggling with one of the intruders, a wiry figure who swung a crowbar. The second man lay crumpled against the wall, moaning. Jonas dodged a swing, baton raised, catching the attacker's shoulder with a precise strike. The crowbar clattered to the ground, and Jonas pinned the man, breathing hard. Lightning illuminated the alley, revealing the shock in the thug's eyes. Blood trickled from a split lip. "Stay down," Jonas growled, pressing him to the wet asphalt. Rainwater streamed around them, pooling in broken patches of concrete. For a moment, the world was reduced to harsh breathing, pounding rain, and flickering neon from the bakery sign. Then a wail of sirens pierced the air. Backup was coming. Maybe the neighbors' calls had gone through, or Officer Jackson had suspected a break-in. Either way, the Viper's plan to hit the bakery had been foiled. Yet as the thunder rolled overhead, Elisa's mind flashed to one name: Silas. This was just a small strike team, not the show of force they'd been dreading. That meant the worst was probably still ahead. 15 minutes later, the alley and the bakery's rear entrance were swarming with flashing police lights. Officer Jackson arrived, panting as she jogged through the rain to where Elisa and Jonas stood watch. A trio of uniformed officers detained the three subdued thugs, reading them their rights and gathering evidence from the van. Jackson's gaze swept over the scene. Crowbar on the ground, battered men in cuffs, Jonas and Elisa soaked to the bone. She let out a low whistle. You two really went for it. Elisa shrugged, water dripping from her hair onto her shoulders. They were about to break into Ida's bakery. We couldn't let it happen. Jonas gave a curt nod, still catching his breath. Looked like they planned some heavy vandalism or theft. Maybe both. Sakikon, nearby Ida and her husband hovered, relief and shock evident in their eyes. You saved our shop, Ida murmured, voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, Jackson gestured them aside, out of earshot of the other officers. This is good work, she said quietly, but I need your statements. Officially, you acted in self-defense, right? Elisa tensed. They attacked first, she said carefully. We only did what was necessary to stop them. Jackson grimaced. It's complicated. Vigilante actions can be turned against you if the Vipers press charges or spin a story. But given they were attempting a break-in, we should be able to argue you prevented a crime. Let's just ensure the record is clear. Jonas inhaled deeply. We'll cooperate, but there's still Silas to worry about. Jackson nodded. We haven't gotten any leads on his location tonight. These three might give us something, but I wouldn't count on it. Men like him have layers of protection. If he's planning that show of force, it could still be on the horizon. Thunder rumbled overhead, as if punctuating her warning. Elisa pressed a hand to her temple, exhaustion settling in. So we're stuck waiting for him to make the next move. Jackson's features softened in sympathy. I'm sorry, Ms. Pierce. We're doing everything we can. In the next hour, they gave brief statements and turned over any evidence from the scuffle. The driver was still rubbing his pepper-sprayed eyes, cursing under his breath. One of the men had a minor fracture from Jonas's baton strike. The police arranged ambulances for them, but the arrest seemed solid. Burglary tools, crowbars, plus the van traced to a fake rental ID. Ida and her husband, though shaken, thanked Elisa and Jonas profusely. Ida's husband insisted on giving them free pastries, a gesture of gratitude in the midst of chaos. The dawn was creeping in, a pale glow revealing a battered alley and the battered defenders within it. Elisa caught sight of her reflection in a puddle. She looked drained, a bruise forming on her cheek, clothes plastered to her body. Yet behind the fatigue, she saw a flicker of resolve. If Silas thought waves of intimidation would make them fold, he'd underestimated this community. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder. You all right? He asked gently. She mustered a faint smile. I'll manage. Let's see if we can get a few hours of rest before checking on everyone else. He nodded, glancing around. Good call, but keep your phone on. Something tells me this was only a preliminary strike. The swirling lights of police cars cast long shadows across the alley as they departed. Elisa's heart felt just as shadowed, weighed down by the knowledge that the real storm was still coming. If this was how the Vipers operated in small teams, what kind of carnage would they unleash with a full-scale assault, especially under Silas's calculated leadership? 2 days passed, each one tense but surprisingly quiet. The arrests at the bakery had rattled the Vipers, at least temporarily. The block's watch system held steady, with neighbors taking shifts to keep an eye on each other's shops. Though anxious, they found cautious hope in each small victory. Some of the older folks reminisced about how the neighborhood once united against petty criminals decades ago, drawing parallels to their current solidarity. Yet Elisa's nerves remained taut. Silas had not surfaced publicly, and no one had any leads on his whereabouts. Rumors swirled of a large gathering of Viper affiliates in a different borough, possibly a strategy meeting. Jonas tried tapping into old security contacts but found nothing concrete. In the diner, business wobbled between lulls and quick bursts of customers. Some avoided going out altogether, fearing Viper reprisals. Others came specifically to support Elisa, ordering meals as a statement of solidarity. One afternoon, a small group of college students made a point of snapping photos inside the diner, posting on social media about standing with local businesses against gang violence. It warmed Elisa's heart, but also made her uneasy. Public attention could provoke Silas. On a rare break from the kitchen, Elisa sat in her office, eyeing the locked drawer with her firearms. Her finger traced the key in her pocket. She flashed back to a memory of a dust-choked battlefield, her rifle's scope trained on a distant figure. The recollection tightened her throat. Eventually, she shut her eyes and breathed slowly. deciding not to open the drawer just yet. That same evening, Jonas cornered her in the alley behind the diner. The sun was setting, washing the sky in bruised purples and oranges. "I've talked to a few folks," he said quietly. "There's chatter about a suspicious group scoping out the rooftops around here. Could be the Vipers planning vantage points or something else." Elisa's brow furrowed. "Rooftops?" "Yeah," Jonas replied, scanning the horizon. "In the Corps, we'd use rooftops to place snipers or watchers. Not sure if these guys have that skill, but it's a tactic." Her stomach nodded. If Silas was upping the ante, he might position armed lookouts or attempt a surprise attack from above. She grimaced. "Then we have to adapt, maybe watch the rooftops ourselves." Jonas nodded. "Precisely. But it's risky to climb up there without a plan, especially at night. I do it in daylight, check for signs of tampering or vantage setups. Maybe we can ask the building supers if they've noticed anything off." Elisa rubbed her temples. "Sure. Let's coordinate that for tomorrow. Today has been long." The thought of scaling rooftops to preempt a gang assault made her realize just how far outside normal civilian life she'd landed. They headed back inside the diner. A handful of customers murmured in low voices, finishing their meals. Brian waved from a booth, rechecking security footage on his phone. Ida and her husband were reviewing finances, sifting through receipts at the counter, forced to operate with a half-closed bakery. The sense of siege was palpable. Before closing, Officer Jackson stopped by. She spoke briefly with Elisa and Jonas, reiterating the same stance. Without definitive evidence of a large-scale attack, the precinct couldn't allocate major resources. She did, however, promise to drive by more frequently at night. Elisa thanked her, though frustration gnawed at her. The Vipers were cunning, rarely exposing themselves to legal scrutiny. Silas was the puppet master, and until she found a way to cut his strings, the intimidation would continue. After Jackson left, Elisa gazed at the diner's reflection in the darkening window. She saw a warrior's silhouette rather than a chef's. The transformation felt inevitable now. She whispered to herself, "If you want a war, Silas, you'll get one." Yet even as she said it, a flicker of dread coiled in her gut, knowing what a war could truly cost. The next day, Elisa and Jonas dedicated the early morning hours to rooftop reconnaissance. Armed with permission from a few friendly building superintendents, they climbed narrow stairwells and inspected tarred roofs. The city spread out beneath them, a patchwork of brick and concrete, water tanks, and tangled fire escapes. Morning light glinted off wet surfaces from the previous night's rain. On the first two buildings, they found nothing suspicious, just laundry lines and old satellite dishes. However, upon reaching the roof of a 3-story walk-up near Brian's grocery, Jonas paused, brow furrowing. "Look here," he said, crouching by a set of footprints in a still damp patch of tar. They were relatively fresh, an impression left by boots. He followed the trail to the edge of the roof, where scuff marks indicated someone had knelt or leaned against the low parapet wall. Elisa's skin prickled. She peered over the edge, seeing a direct line of sight down to the grocery's entrance. "This is a perfect vantage point," she muttered. "Whoever was here could watch Brian's shop without being seen." Jonas exhaled slowly. So the Vipers might be reconnoitering, scoping out approaches, measuring response times. This is bigger than random intimidation. They documented the footprints with photos, then continued searching the perimeter. A worn cigarette butt with a foreign brand lay near the scuff marks, suggesting the presence of someone with a distinct habit. No direct proof that it was a Viper, but the circumstantial evidence was strong. After climbing back down, they updated Brian, who wore a troubled frown. "That's too close for comfort," he said, nervously adjusting his store's security camera angles. "Feels like we're being stalked." Jonas set a reassuring hand on Brian's shoulder. "We'll keep an eye on it. Maybe put up a few dummy cameras on the roof. If the superintendent allows it, something to discourage repeat visits." While Jonas helped Brian, Elisa ventured to Mike's bookstore, delivering the news about rooftop scouts. Mike looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "They're hunting us," he lamented. "Waiting for the perfect moment to strike, I guess." Elisa tried to offer a sliver of encouragement. "We'll stay vigilant. The more we learn, the less surprise they have." Yet as she spoke, she couldn't help picturing Silas calculating every angle. The Vipers might push again soon, maybe in a coordinated attack on multiple shops. The arrests of their small break-in team might have only been a minor inconvenience. Now that Silas likely knew the neighborhood was organizing, he'd come with greater force. Around noon, the diner filled with a few more patrons than usual, some local office workers grabbing lunch, an older couple out for a midday stroll. Elisa went through the motions of cooking and serving, though her mind stayed locked on strategy. She'd left war zones before for a reason: the endless waiting, the chess match of moves and counter-moves, the strain on everyone's psyche. Jonas stayed by the counter, eyes roving. Occasionally they exchanged terse updates. Neither wanted to worry the customers, so they kept talk of tactics low. As the day progressed without incident, tension simmered just below the surface. No one dared relax fully. By closing time, a fresh swirl of clouds darkened the sky, threatening another downpour. Elisa lingered at the entrance, flipping the neon sign off. Tomorrow would be another watch shift, another test of endurance. She let out a weary breath, turning the lock. "Hang in there," she told herself. "We're keeping them at bay." But a voice in the back of her mind whispered that holding the line might not be enough when facing a determined criminal mastermind. Eventually, they'd have to confront Silas head-on. That confrontation arrived quicker than anyone expected. It was well past midnight when the group chat exploded with frantic messages. Elisa had just drifted into an uneasy sleep in her apartment when her phone buzzed repeatedly, snapping her fully awake. She saw the code phrase flash on the screen, "Now or never." Her heart hammered. She scrambled to call Jonas, but he was already texting her. "Big group at the grocery." Brian hit the alarm. "Hurry!" Throwing on a jacket, she grabbed her keys and sprinted into the hall. Her building stairwell echoed with the pounding of her footsteps as she bounded down to the street. Rain battered the sidewalks again, lightning illuminating the skyline. She flagged a taxi that happened to be passing. An unlikely stroke of luck at this hour. "Corner of Elm and Brook," she shouted, ignoring the driver's startled look. The cab sped off, splashing through puddles in the deserted streets. When they neared the grocery, Elisa saw a cluster of figures milling about on the sidewalk, some brandishing pipes or bats. One man towered above the rest, wearing a dark coat that accentuated his broad shoulders. Even at a distance, Elisa recognized the confident posture. Silas. Dread prickled over her skin. This was no small crew, at least 8 or 9 men, and their leader had finally emerged. She paid the cabbie with a trembling hand, then ducked behind a parked car to survey the scene. Jonas was on the opposite side of the street, also taking cover. Their eyes met, and she gave him a terse nod, confirming, "I'm here." Above the grocery's door, lights flickered. Brian must have switched them on to deter intruders, but the Vipers didn't seem concerned. Just then, Brian's voice echoed from inside. "Leave me alone! The police are on their way!" The Vipers laughed, a sinister chorus swallowed by thunder. Silas stepped forward, raising a hand to silence them. Elisa's phone buzzed again. "Ida and Raul en route, 2 minutes away. Mike inside grocery with Brian." Good. At least reinforcements were coming, but time was running short. The Vipers were already banging on the locked glass door, threatening to break it. Steeling herself, Elisa dashed across the street to join Jonas in a shallow doorway. Lightning revealed Silas's face, a calm, ruthless expression. He called out, "We tried being polite, but your neighborhood doesn't listen. Now, you pay the price." He leveled a glare at the door. "Open up or we smash our way in." Jonas hissed, "We can't let them get inside. Brian and Mike could be trapped." He patted his belt, revealing pepper spray, a baton, and a concealed small pistol. Lisa's stomach churned at the sight of the firearm. So far, they'd avoided deadly force. She whispered, "I have to distract them, draw them away from the store." Jonas frowned. "That's dangerous, especially with Silas here." Lisa's eyes hardened. "I can handle it. You circle around, help Brian and Mike slip out the back. Then we can surround them until help arrives." He nodded reluctantly. "All right, but be careful." With that, he slipped into the shadows, keeping low. Elisa took a steadying breath, recalling every stealth infiltration she'd ever done. This time, though, she wouldn't stay hidden. She stood up, storm-lashed rain soaking her hair, and advanced on the Vipers from the sidewalk's edge. Her heart threatened to burst from her chest. "Remember your training," she told herself. "Control your breathing, your fear." When she was just 20 feet away, she shouted, Hey, cowards! The men whirled around, startled. Silas turned slowly, his sharp gaze locking onto her. His expression registered surprise, then dark amusement. Elisa squared her shoulders, fists clenched at her sides. The wind whipped between them, carrying the smell of ozone and tension. Leave them alone, Silas. You want to settle this? Face me. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ring of armed thugs who parted like wolves around their alpha. Silas offered a cold, predatory smile, stepping forward in the rain. I was hoping you'd show up. Let's see if you're as tough as your friends say. Silas motioned for his men to stand back, clearly intent on making this personal. The storm raged overhead, each flash of lightning casting jagged shadows across the pavement. Elisa stood her ground, heart pounding. She was armed only with a baton and pepper spray, unwilling to escalate unless absolutely necessary. Silas, however, reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek handgun. Thunder cracked, punctuating the gesture like an exclamation point. A murmur rippled through the circle of vipers. Some stepped closer, forming a semi-enclosed arena around the grocery's entrance. From the corner of her eye, Elisa spotted Jonas darting toward the rear of the store, presumably to help Brian and Mike escape. Good. At least they'd be safe if she could keep the gang's attention. Elisa lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. She recalled everything she knew about Silas. Cunning, manipulative, not one to dirty his hands unless provoked. She'd provoked him, all right. You think a gun scares me? She said, voice steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. Silas tilted his head, raindrops glinting off his short-cropped hair. I think you know how deadly they can be, Ms. Pierce. Word is, you're no ordinary chef. Her stomach flipped. He knows. She didn't deny it, simply squared her stance. You threaten innocent people. You destroy shops and demand money. Your men attack kids and the elderly. You're the lowest form of criminal. He chuckled darkly. And you're a vigilante, beating my men, meddling in my affairs. One of us is going to walk away tonight. The other is going to the morgue, or behind bars. Before she could respond, Silas raised the gun, pointing it at her chest. The vipers looked on, some with anticipation, others with a flicker of uncertainty. This was crossing a line they might not have signed up for. Elisa's pulse jackhammered. She couldn't match a bullet with a baton, not in open space. Stall him. Buy time for Jonas to get Brian and Mike out. Summoning all the courage she had, she took a single step forward, arms raised in a non-threatening gesture. You won't shoot me in front of all these witnesses. Cops will have you on first-degree murder, she said, noting that the swirling storm and late hour had reduced public presence. But the vipers themselves could turn state's evidence if everything went sour. Even your own men might question your leadership if you start killing civilians on the street. His eyes flickered with disdain. They're loyal to me, and if anyone breaks that loyalty, well, they know the consequences. Still, he didn't pull the trigger. Maybe the idea of so openly executing her gave him pause. Instead, he barked at his men. Grab her! She wants to protect these people so bad. Let's see how she fights when she's outnumbered. A pair of vipers lunged for Elisa. She sprang back, swinging the baton in a quick arc. One man yelped as it cracked against his knuckles, sending his metal pipe clattering. The other feinted left, then tackled her low. They tumbled onto the slick pavement, water spraying. She kicked out, hard in her throat, connecting with his ribs. A grunt of pain, and he rolled off. She scrambled upright, but another thug rushed from behind, wrapping an arm around her neck. Gasping for air, she elbowed him, landing a blow to his side. Her baton slipped from her grasp. Lightning flared again, revealing Silas watching with dark amusement. Gun still in hand but not firing. Perhaps he wanted her subdued, not dead, so he could force compliance or parade her as an example. Suddenly, a flash of movement from the side. Jonas emerged, baton whirling. He clobbered the thug who held Elisa, freeing her. Rain streamed down his face, but his eyes blazed with fierce determination. You good? He shouted over the storm. She seized her baton from the ground, panting. I've been better. Brian and Mike? Safe in the alley, Jonas confirmed. A roar of outrage rose from the gang. Silas bared his teeth, raising his weapon again. At that moment, the whine of sirens cut through the air. Finally, Elisa thought. Adrenaline surging. The police were coming. But if Silas was desperate, he might start shooting. The circle of vipers faltered, some turning to look for the approaching squad cars. Lightning crashed, and in that stark glare, Elisa saw Silas's eyes narrow. His finger twitched on the trigger. She braced for the shot, but Jonas lunged, batting Silas's arm aside. The gun fired, the muzzle flash illuminating the night. A bullet whizzed past Elisa's ear, close enough that the shockwave stung. She dropped low, instincts screaming. Jonas grappled with Silas, both men struggling for control of the firearm. Chaos exploded. Some Vipers ran, others rushed to help Silas. Police vehicles screeched to a halt at the intersection, red and blue lights dancing wildly. Despite the chaos, Elisa's training snapped into place. She scooped up her baton and drove forward, determined to end it here and now, once and for all. And so the storm finally passed. Elisa stood victorious, her diner lights once again glowing as a beacon of hope in Brooklyn. In the wake of Silas's downfall, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, reminded that unity and courage can topple even the most intimidating foes. Though scars remain, broken windows, lingering fears, and bruises earned in battle, each day brings renewed determination. Elisa returns to her life as a chef, grateful for second chances and the warmth of supportive friends. From my perspective, this journey proves that no one is ever as ordinary as they seem. We all have hidden strength waiting to be unleashed when the moment calls for it. What do you think about Elisa's transformation and her stand against oppression? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's keep the discussion going.